Welcome back to Dreamland Encounters, where real-life stories of otherworldly beings help you unwind and drift off to sleep. Before we begin, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment and let me know where you're tuning in from. Find a cozy spot, get comfortable, and let's explore the shadows. For decades, witnesses have shared a chilling narrative of mysterious encounters following UFO sightings. The men in black arrive unannounced, silent, intimidating figures in crisp black suits with blank expressions, asking questions that cut through the silence like sharpened glass. These 29 true accounts from around the world reveal stories of enigmatic figures who appear and vanish without a trace. Herbert Hopkins knows this story intimately. On a quiet evening in 1976, the respected physician and part-time UFO consultant was alone at home, reviewing case notes. A precise phone call interrupted his work. The caller, calm and polite, introduced himself as a fellow researcher wanting to discuss the very case Hopkins was investigating. Hopkins agreed, setting down the receiver without much thought. Minutes later, a knock echoed at his front door. The man who entered was extraordinary, unnaturally thin, with skin pale and smooth as wax. A perfectly tailored black suit and derby hat framed his unusual appearance. As he stepped inside, the light revealed startling details. Skin stretched evenly over bone, lips a vivid, sharply defined red that seemed painted. His movements were mechanical and precise, lacking the small, unconscious adjustments that mark human behavior. Hopkins, trained to read subtle human cues, found himself deeply unsettled. The visitor wasted no time with pleasantries. His questions were direct, as if he already knew every detail of the UFO case and merely sought confirmation. Throughout their exchange, the man's gaze never wavered from Hopkins. Midway through their conversation, he produced a small coin, rolling it deliberately between his fingers. Hopkins watched intently as the coin began to fade. So settle in, slow your breathing, and drift into the unknown. Because tonight, the visitors are already here. At the heart of a tale that would ripple through quiet conversations lay an encounter that transformed Hopkins's UFO research. A visitor arrived, his presence marked by an unsettling transformation. With emotionless precision, he delivered an unequivocal message. You will stop your work on this case. Hopkins observed subtle shifts in the man's behavior. His movements became mechanical, speech slowing to deliberate pauses. Questions were calculated, testing the researcher's resolve. As the visitor's energy waned, he announced his departure, carefully adjusting his derby hat before vanishing into darkness without a sound. That night, Hopkins acted with sudden determination. Every trace of his UFO research disappeared. Case files, photographs, transcripts, all were systematically destroyed before dawn. His professional demeanor changed instantly. Colleagues found him unreachable, his responses distant when contact was made. I'm stepping away, he would say, offering no explanation. The community noticed the change. The local librarian at the Old Orchard Beach Historical Society remarked on his sudden silence. Where he once frequently requested materials about aerial phenomena, now there was nothing. Neighbors observed his increasing privacy, drawn curtains, a porch light that remained perpetually dark. Word spread quietly through personal networks. No public announcement marked the transformation. Instead, hushed conversations carried a consistent narrative. A pale man in a black suit who arrived unexpectedly performed an inexplicable act and left behind a complete cessation of investigation. Speculation about the visitor's origins circulated widely. Some linked him to the Air Force Office of Special Investigations, known for interviewing and potentially discouraging UFO witnesses. Others considered the FBI, remembering its history of surveillance of civilian researchers. The core of the story remained unchanged. A mysterious intervention that abruptly ended Hopkins's UFO research. The Maury Island Incident in June 1947 marked a turning point in Men in Black encounters. Harold Dahl's routine patrol on Puget Sound suddenly transformed when 6 metallic discs appeared overhead. As one disc faltered, dropping molten debris, fragments hissed into the water and struck Dahl's boat, burning his son and killing their dog. Dahl kept the encounter close, sharing details only with his boss, Fred Chrisman, and 2 close friends. He showed no inclination to publicize the event, not even telling his wife. The next morning, an unexpected caller arranged a breakfast meeting at a Tacoma diner, where a man in a black suit was already waiting. Without formality, the stranger launched into a chilling monologue. He knew every precise detail of the morning's events, delivering them with an unblinking, penetrating gaze. The encounter left a lasting impact on Hopkins, whose transformation became a subject of significant interest among researchers. Friends and colleagues noticed dramatic shifts in his behavior. The once curious researcher who eagerly explored fringe topics suddenly withdrew. He stopped attending evening gatherings and became reluctant to discuss the case. When pressed, he would quickly redirect conversations to mundane topics like fishing and local news. An old acquaintance who visited his office found Hopkins warm but evasive. "It's closed," he would say, effectively shutting down any further discussion. One former colleague starkly observed that the man he once knew, someone fascinated by even the strangest claims, had fundamentally changed. In subsequent years, the incident settled into a quiet but persistent corner of Men in Black lore. Researchers cited it in books and lectures, noting its unique characteristic: a complete silencing of a willing researcher without apparent intimidation or force. Hopkins never elaborated beyond his original account, simply stating, "It happened exactly as I said it did. I've said all I need to say." The case's power lay not in physical evidence, but in its remarkable precision. A lone encounter, a brief meeting, a single inexplicable demonstration, and an entire line of research was abandoned. The files vanished, the work stopped, and the witness stepped away, all within a single evening. The incident haunted Dahl long after the strange encounter. A man with an eerily controlled demeanor had approached him, suggesting he forget everything he'd witnessed. The conversation was brief, lasting around 15 minutes, and ended abruptly when the man left without paying for his coffee, disappearing into a black sedan, merging with morning traffic. What troubled Dahl most wasn't just the visual details of the craft or the debris spray, but the way the man spoke about his son's injury and the dog's death. His words carried an unsettling weight, delivered with a casual indifference that seemed calculated. The pale, sharp-featured stranger appeared trained to minimize emotional expression. In the days following the encounter, Dahl chose silence. When a local reporter inquired about rumors of strange discs over the sound, he dismissed the claims as a misunderstanding. Within a week, he publicly withdrew his entire account, yet the story had already spread beyond his control. Chrisman, firmly believing something unusual had occurred, reached out to an Army Air Force contact and offered to demonstrate the debris. 2 intelligence officers, Captain William Davidson and Lieutenant Frank Brown, traveled from Hamilton Field in California to conduct extensive interviews. During their investigation, the officers meticulously examined the boat's damage and collected debris samples. Their records noted unusual materials with a slag-like texture different from standard metal alloys. They also documented narrative inconsistencies and uncertainties in Dahl's account, though it remained unclear whether these resulted from genuine confusion or reluctance to speak openly. After completing their interviews, Davidson and Brown boarded their B-25 bomber to return to California, carrying the collected samples. Tragically, near Kelso, Washington, the plane caught fire, adding another layer of mystery to an already perplexing event. 2 men crashed, killing both men, with the debris completely destroyed in the blaze. The military quickly spread news of the crash, presenting it to the public as a routine accident. No details emerged about what the officers had been carrying for Dahl. This event only reinforced his decision to remain silent. His instructions were clear. Forget what he saw, and now 2 men were dead. Over the years, a larger narrative began to unfold around encounters with mysterious men in black. Harold Dahl's experience marked a critical turning point. While disc sightings were brief and fleeting, the subsequent encounter felt deliberate and unavoidable. A pattern emerged that would repeat countless times. Someone would witness something extraordinary, followed almost inevitably by a visit. A knock at the door, a black car waiting outside, strangers who seemed to know everything. The Robert Richardson incident from July 1967 in Toledo, Ohio, perfectly illustrated this phenomenon. A 19-year-old University of Toledo student driving home late one night struck something metallic. Upon pulling over, he discovered a small, unusually cool, silvery fragment, which he quietly pocketed and took home. Researchers consistently noted a key characteristic in these encounters. The visitors arrived with absolute authority, without credentials, and seemingly knowing more than they should. Their interest wasn't in threats, but in control. Their presence raised more questions than answers. Richardson contacted his local UFO research group about the fragment, who advised careful preservation. He stored it in a bedroom drawer, believing analysis could wait. 2 days later, everything changed. 2 men appeared at his front door, tall, dressed in dark suits, despite the summer heat, wearing crisp white shirts and narrow ties. One seemed to be in his late 30s, the other in his 50s. Both were pale and expressionless. "Mr. Richardson," the older man said. Privately, Dahl had told a friend that his own diner meeting had felt less like a conversation and more like being briefed about a situation he wanted no part of. The Air Force eventually declared the Maury Island case a hoax, citing Dahl's retraction. Yet, the timeline, with its mysterious visit, reluctant witness, and unexplained loss of physical evidence, didn't sit right with everyone. 2 men approached Richardson with a weighted, unspoken authority. One stepped forward, producing a notepad with his personal details. "We know what you have," the older man stated directly. "You will give it to us." When Richardson requested identification, they ignored him, offering no official credentials. The younger one simply emphasized, "It is important for your safety that you comply." The conversation lasted barely 5 minutes. Richardson explained the metal piece had already been sent for analysis. The older man leaned closer, his voice lowering with a subtle threat. "If you are lying, it will be worse for you." Without another word, they turned and walked to a black 1963 Cadillac sedan, which disappeared silently into the next block. 3 nights later, around 9 p.m., another knock came. A single younger man in a dark suit and pale gray fedora arrived. Richardson later noted his skin's odd, unnaturally smooth texture. Though his tone was more conversational, the message remained consistent. The fragment must be returned. When Richardson again stated he no longer possessed the item, the man smiled faintly and said, "You will retrieve it." Then came a chilling question. "How would you like it if we harmed someone close to you? Your wife, perhaps?" Richardson wasn't married, but he had been dating someone steadily. The man named her fully, first and last name, and recited her address. Casually tipping his hat, he walked away, as if the threat was merely casual conversation. From that night forward, Richardson's sense of safety fundamentally changed. The UFO group had already passed the fragment to a researcher for testing. Yet the men's intimate knowledge of his life, their precision in details, continued to haunt him. The persistent black Cadillac would show up near his apartment, sometimes idling nearby. These encounters became another thread in the growing tapestry of men in black folklore. unexplained, authoritative, and deeply unsettling. Richardson was being watched. At first, these encounters seemed sporadic. Sometimes the observers kept their distance, other times positioning themselves close enough to make him uneasy. Mundane activities like grocery shopping or library visits attracted subtle surveillance. Everywhere he went, potential watchers emerged. A man browsing magazines, another reading a motionless newspaper in a diner's corner booth. He confided only in a few trusted individuals, including a university physics professor with deep interest in UFO research. The professor's response sent chills down Richardson's spine. "If those men are who I think they are, you don't want to test their patience." Reporting such encounters to law enforcement seemed impossible. In 1967, describing men in black suits threatening him over a UFO fragment would likely invite ridicule or worse, draw unwanted attention from the agencies he suspected were orchestrating these interactions. Within UFO research circles, Richardson's case began to align with a troubling pattern documented by NICAP. Physical trace UFO cases showed a consistent theme. Witnesses retrieving unusual materials were subsequently visited by unidentified men, often presumed connected to federal agencies like the Air Force's RSI. Typically, the retrieved materials would vanish permanently. Laboratory analysis of Richardson's fragment proved inconclusive. Researchers noted unusual structural properties, but stopped short of declaring it extraterrestrial. Before a second round of testing could be conducted, the fragment disappeared under unexplained circumstances. As suddenly as they began, the encounters ceased. The surveillance car vanished, and the mysterious strangers disappeared. Richardson was left with an enduring sense of vulnerability, a feeling that forces beyond legal or rational understanding had briefly intersected with his life. In later years, Richardson discussed his experience carefully. He never claimed the men were aliens, or that the fragment definitively originated from another world. Instead, he emphasized their controlled, unsettling demeanor, a testament to an experience that defied conventional explanation. The spring of 1968 in Jersey City, New Jersey, would forever remain a backdrop to this strange encounter. A dark sedan sat across the street, its driver a motionless figure in a sharp suit. Mary Robinson was heading to work, unaware that this moment would become a pivotal chapter in UFO research folklore. The man behind the wheel embodied the mysterious phenomenon her husband Jack had spent years investigating. Jack Robinson was a respected local researcher, meticulously documenting close encounter accounts. His dedication had drawn attention from unexplained sources. The pale-faced man watched Mary with an unnerving intensity that suggested more than casual observation. Later, when Mary returned home, subtle signs hinted at an intrusion. Papers on her desk had shifted. A drawer stood slightly open, though she was certain she'd closed it. Nothing was missing, but the deliberate arrangement felt wrong. She initially dismissed her concerns as mere imagination. Richardson's similar experience would later validate her growing unease. His UFO encounter became notable not for the initial sighting, but for what followed. Unidentified agents systematically erased physical evidence, their actions extending beyond Richardson to his entire social circle. These encounters were never about simple information suppression. As Richardson noted, the goal was psychological manipulation. The men in black operated with surgical precision, dismantling witnesses' credibility through calculated disruption. Physical proof might vanish, but the psychological impact remained devastating and enduring. Decades later, memories of these encounters would persist. The mysterious agent's methodology suggested knowledge far beyond conventional understanding. They left witnesses like Mary and Richardson with nothing but an unsettling sense of being watched and controlled. For Mary, seeing the man in the sedan crystallized her growing suspicion. Something was happening just beyond the edge of comprehension, a systematic intervention that defied explanation. The morning started like any other for Mary Robinson. Just after 8 a.m., she noticed a man in a black sedan parked across from their apartment. She caught the license plate number, though the moment soon slipped from her mind. That evening, Mary asked Jack if anyone had recently contacted him about his work. Jack frowned and shook his head. As she described the man, the suit, the unblinking stare, Jack's expression grew tense. He was already contemplating who might confirm whether they were under surveillance. The next morning, the same car was back, in the same position. The man sat motionless, adjusting something in his lap, a notebook or small device, while his gaze remained fixed on their building. By the third day, Mary was convinced this was no coincidence. She urged Jack to take action. He reached out to Timothy Green Beckley, a fellow UFO researcher known for pursuing leads others would avoid. Without hesitation, Beckley contacted Jim Moseley, a photographer interested in documenting unusual phenomena. On the fourth morning, everything aligned. Pale sunlight, cool air, and the black sedan exactly where it had been before. The man wore a dark suit, high-buttoned white shirt, and a hat, an outfit that seemed almost deliberately unremarkable. Beckley and Moseley approached casually, parking half a block away and walking. Beckley observed the man's remarkable stillness, no fidgeting, no impatience, as if he could sit indefinitely. As they passed, the man's gaze remained locked on the Robinsons' building. Moseley quickly snapped a photograph. The shutter's click went unnoticed. Jack's UFO research, while not classified, had recently attracted unexpected attention. He compiled reports and chased rumors, publishing in small newsletters. Witnesses were now sharing accounts of physical trace evidence, adding a new layer of intrigue to his work. The Robinsons had grown increasingly uneasy. Strange incidents were multiplying around them. Mary noticed her apartment door lock seemed roughly handled, and a jewelry box was moved with precise 2-inch precision. Jack's research papers showed signs of an unauthorized examination, with pages stacked out of order and edges curled as if touched by damp fingers. A black sedan parked outside their apartment was the first sign something was amiss. By the first week's end, the car wasn't their only concern. A second figure emerged, another man in a dark suit, standing silently in the building's lobby during odd hours. He would vanish before Jack could confront him. Neighbors began asking questions, sensing something unusual was happening. Jack started checking the street before leaving the apartment. Mary drew the curtains during the day, uneasy about unseen eyes looking in. Their phone calls felt unnatural, with occasional clicks and brief static patches. The government guy sat in a car, and Mary recalled seeing 2 men in suits walking slowly down the hallway outside their apartment late one night. They didn't knock or speak, just walked, stopped outside the Robinsons' door, and left. A witness who later described the scene compared it to photographing a breathing mannequin. The grainy black and white image would become legendary in Men in Black lore. A figure casting a shadow over his eyes. His expression neither smiled nor frowned. When Beckley returned a week later, the car was still there. He and Moseley decided to take a more direct approach. They walked past the sedan again, slower this time. Beckley looked directly at the man and said, "Morning." The man didn't blink or acknowledge the greeting. His head remained perfectly still, his gaze fixed on the building, the agencies potentially involved. The FBI or Air Force Office of Special Investigations were known to monitor UFO-related cases. The implications were unsettling. This wasn't casual observation, but potentially authorized monitoring they couldn't challenge. The Robinsons were certain of one thing: someone was watching them, but the who and why remained a mystery. The Robinsons' apartment slowly returned to its routine after the black sedan vanished on the 10th day, but the experience lingered. Jack became more cautious, securing his research notes in a metal file cabinet and keeping sensitive correspondence away from their home. Mary couldn't shake the memory of the man's face in the car window, or the way his gaze seemed to weigh down the air when Mosley's photograph began circulating among UFO researchers. The image sparked intense debate. Some believed the man might have been a private investigator or a low-level government operative monitoring Jack's work. Others saw something more mysterious, an archetype of the men in black captured in daylight. In subsequent years, the Robinson case became a reference point in conferences and books, not because it conclusively proved the existence of mysterious surveillance, but because it aligned so closely with other witnesses' accounts of quiet, deliberate monitoring for Jack and Mary. The incident was deeply personal. The man had never spoken or approached them directly, yet his presence had fundamentally disrupted their sense of security. In 1961, a cold and silent night in Minot, North Dakota, set the stage for an extraordinary event. Paul Miller, a young Air Force reservist, was returning from a hunting trip with 3 companions when something unusual interrupted their journey. A glowing object hovered low in a nearby field, and 2 strange figures emerged, moving in an unnaturally fluid manner toward a fence line. On pure instinct, Miller raised his rifle and fired. Suddenly, they found themselves back in the car, heading toward Minot Air Force Base. Their watches indicated hours had passed, yet none could remember leaving the field. No report was filed. An unspoken agreement among the 4 men ensured the incident remained unmentioned. They understood that discussing unusual events too openly on base could quickly attract the attention of intelligence officers from the Office of Special Investigations or other federal agencies. In the early hours, Miller sat at his desk when a call came through with succinct authorities. 2 men arrived within the hour, their appearance stark in uniform. Dark suits, white shirts, narrow black ties, faces pale and expressions devoid of emotion. Without pleasantries, one man stated directly, "Mr. Ronan, Miller, you had an encounter last night." Miller hesitated, knowing he'd shared his experience with no one on base. "I don't know what you mean," he responded carefully. A folder landed on his desk, its contents revealing an unsettling inventory of personal information. Every detail was meticulously documented: his name, address, family members, even the name of his elementary school. The typed sheet laid bare his entire history. "You shot at something you shouldn't have," the first man said. Miller's chest tightened. "Who told you that?" Silence was their only reply. One agent leaned closer, speaking in a flat, emotionless tone. "We know what you saw, and we know where you live. It would be best if you forgot." In the days that followed, Miller's world subtly shifted. A black sedan began appearing along the road to his home at irregular intervals. Through curtained windows, he'd spot a man in dark sunglasses, sitting motionless in the driver's seat. His hunting companions encountered similar experiences. Strange vehicles trailing them briefly, men in suits materializing near their homes, vanishing the moment someone approached. These encounters remained unspoken, a silent understanding binding them. From his office window, Miller had watched the agents walk in perfect synchronization to their vehicle, parked in a section reserved for official cars. No one questioned its presence. The car departed as silently as it had arrived. That evening, Miller double-checked every door lock. His rifle stayed within immediate reach, a testament to the unspoken threat that now permeated his existence. Their visit was brief, lasting barely 10 minutes, but its impact lingered. A reminder that being watched didn't always require direct confrontation. Sometimes the most effective pressure left nothing tangible, except a single photograph etched in the memory of men who sat in silence, reasons unexplained. Miller's transformation was subtle but unmistakable. The base dynamics had shifted, marked by an eerie silence that descended whenever he entered a room. Uniformed colleagues would abruptly change subjects, hinting at something unspoken. Unknown men in civilian clothing lurked near the mess hall, watching his movements with an unsettling intensity. The psychological impact was gradual. Miller became hypervigilant, constantly checking rearview mirrors, hesitating before opening doors, and scanning parked vehicles. Routine sounds, a phone ringing, footsteps in corridors, now triggered deep tension. He was always anticipating another unexpected visit. His family witnessed the change. Dinner conversations grew hushed. Late at night, he would stare out windows for hours, his wife sensing something was deeply wrong, despite his reassurances. In the tight-knit base community, such changes didn't go unnoticed. Subtle signs of isolation emerged. A familiar mechanic avoided eye contact for weeks. A colleague quietly advised caution in conversations. Miller understood his name was now associated with something unusual. Weeks turned into months, and the unease remained persistent. Eventually, Miller left the Air Force Reserve, haunted by an incident etched in his memory. By the late 1960s and early 70s, researchers began documenting patterns of men in black visits. When Miller heard these descriptions, he recognized them instantly. Distinctive characteristics of unshakable formality, strange knowledge, and quiet but heavy intimidation. It wasn't until the late 1970s that he agreed to share his story with a UFO researcher, and even then he hesitated. The fear of somehow summoning them back was real. For years he had recurring nightmares of returning to his office to find the two men waiting. By the time his account entered UFO literature, the original sighting had almost become secondary. The focus shifted to the responses, the men's precision, speed, and approach. Within hours, they had appeared with intimate personal and military background information, issuing a warning without any official acknowledgement. Researchers noted the unusual coordination. If these men were from recognized agencies like OSI Air Force Intelligence or the CIA, why hadn't they identified themselves? And if they weren't official representatives, how had they gained such specific knowledge? Miller's memory lingered, sharp and unsettling decades later. The encounter with those men remained etched in his mind. Their synchronized movements, the eerie precision of their presence, every subtle detail stayed with him. How they stepped in perfect unison, shoulders never shifting, hair immaculately placed. In the industrial landscape of 1953 Bridgeport, Connecticut, Albert K. Bender's life was about to change. As founder of the International Flying Saucer Bureau, he led a small network of enthusiasts trading sightings and theories through mail. His top-floor apartment at 784 Broad Street buzzed with activity, surfaces covered in files and correspondence. While preparing an issue of Space Review that summer, Bender hinted he had solved the UFO mystery. Something was different. Strange sensations began to build, a heaviness in the air, faint sulfur or ozone odors, thoughts blurring, pressure mounting behind his eyes. Late one July evening, the atmosphere shifted. Alone in his apartment, Bender watched the clock pass 9 as temperature dropped and desk lamps dimmed. Suddenly, 3 identical men materialized. Black suits, black hats, crisp white shirts, skin pale and almost gray. Miller would later speak sparingly about such encounters. "I was the quiet that got to me," he'd say. Those who heard him understood. The men didn't need to yell. Their controlled presence and implied authority spoke volumes. In UFO discussion groups, his account became a benchmark for men in black encounters. Some listeners found the mere possibility of such an interaction more disturbing than any specific warning. Miller knew they would ensure he remembered every word. Their luminous eyes seemed to glow from within, holding Bender motionless. The taller figure spoke in a flat, accentless voice, delivering a clear message: stop his UFO research. No explicit threats were made, but the intent was unmistakable. These encounters revealed a deeper truth about mysterious visitors. Whether government agents or something more enigmatic, they operated with absolute certainty. They came and went without seeking approval. leaving behind a silence charged with unspoken understanding. Bender knew that any future encounter would not be accidental. When he tried to speak, his voice emerged weakly. A man stepped closer, and Bender noticed a metallic glint on his wrist, something smooth and curved, partially hidden. A wave of dizziness blurred his vision. Upon clearing, the men had vanished. Days blended into a hazy fog. Headaches intensified, and time lost meaning. Bureau correspondence went unanswered as Bender wandered aimlessly through city streets, leaving his office early. Early September brought their return. Lying down and battling another headache, Bender was enveloped by a familiar sulphurous metallic smell. 3 men stood at his bed's foot. This time, their communication was different, suggesting he was close to uncovering a truth. Bender would later describe their communication as a blend of spoken words and thoughts that materialized instantly in his mind. One visitor revealed a small circular object with a surface that seemed to shift like liquid metal. A sudden chill ran through him as the room receded, and their words became muffled before he lost consciousness. Hours had passed when he awoke to an empty room. Within a week, Bender made a decisive move. He closed the International Flying Saucer Bureau and published a cryptic notice in the October issue of Space Review. The mystery of the flying saucers is no longer a mystery. The source is known, but information is being withheld by order from a higher authority, the International Flying Saucer Bureau, IFSB. Once a bustling organization with an extensive international network, came to an abrupt and unexplained halt. Its leader, Albert Bender, offered no public explanation for the shutdown, leaving his members bewildered. Years would pass before he finally shared his account in the best 1962 book, Flying Saucers and the 3 Men. Bender's description was far from ordinary. He spoke of visitors, who are not just men in black suits, but otherworldly entities with an uncanny ability to appear and disappear at will. These mysterious figures brought an unnatural coldness and a distinctive, unsettling odor. While skeptics quickly dismissed his claims as imagination, supporters were intrigued by the precision and consistency of his encounter. These men arrived unannounced and without identification, carrying an unspoken purpose. They did not argue but simply instructed Bender, who complied. Upon his acquiescence, they vanished without further interaction. The Bridgeport case quickly became a significant reference point in Men in Black research. Investigators began identifying shared elements in subsequent accounts: black suits, an unnatural room atmosphere, invasive knowledge about the witness, and an unspoken pressure to abandon the subject. Bender's response was complete withdrawal. He married, moved away, and stepped back from public UFO research. The IFSB lasted just 2 years, leaving a notable gap in early UFO community history. By 1953, Bender was among the first to face these enigmatic men and completely cease his investigations. In the decades that followed, similar stories emerged. Witnesses described men who looked almost identical, appearing in pairs or groups, speaking in flat voices with questions that seemed more like predetermined statements. Some were told to destroy photographs, others to surrender debris, and many simply to forget. If flying saucers represented the mystery, these men embodied the consequence, returning unannounced, unshaken, and seemingly omniscient about what had been witnessed. Gray Barker's journey into the UFO mystery began with an unexpected connection to Albert Bender, a fellow researcher he had never met in person. Their relationship unfolded through exchanged letters and clippings about regional UFO sightings. When Bender suddenly went silent, Barker's investigative spirit was piqued. In late autumn 1953, Barker traveled to Bridgeport, greeted by the salty air of Long Island Sound as he stepped off the train. Bender agreed to meet, but only in a hotel lobby considered neutral ground. Barker arrived early, watching yellow lamplight spread across the carpet. When Bender appeared, he looked thin and haunted, his eyes carrying a weight beyond typical nervousness. Their conversation was brief, lasting less than 30 minutes. No specific names were mentioned, but phrases like higher source and it's best to leave it alone hinted at something extraordinary. Barker sensed Bender was holding back, unspoken words hanging between them. As he headed toward the elevator after their meeting, he realized he wasn't alone. A figure stood motionless in the hallway, features blurred in shadow. The encounter took on a surreal quality. When the man stepped into the light, he was dressed in a black suit, white shirt, and narrow tie, holding a hat. The hallway felt unnaturally quiet, with no sounds penetrating the silence. The man's voice was flat and accentless when he spoke. "You won't get what you're looking for," more a statement than a threat. Before Barker could respond, the man vanished into the next corridor. Immediately following, Barker found the hall empty. No closed doors, no echoing footsteps. Back in his room, he discovered his meeting notes envelope unsealed, though he was certain he'd closed it downstairs. From the 1950s to 1960s, Barker became a key documenter of what many considered America's most puzzling mystery. Based in Clarksburg, West Virginia, he collected and preserved UFO reports. After Bender shut down the IFSB, a quiet shockwave rippled through the tight-knit UFO community. As a young writer working in film distribution, Barker's investigation continued, driven by an inexplicable encounter that would fuel his lifelong pursuit of the unknown. Ray Barker's research journey took him far beyond conventional UFO investigations. Over the years, he collected more than just standard reports. He gathered accounts that hinted at deeper, more unsettling mysteries. In 1961, a letter from Paul Henderson, a radio technician from West Virginia, drew his attention. Henderson described an encounter that went beyond a simple UFO sighting. Two men in black suits had visited his home, displaying an unnerving knowledge of his experience. They knew precisely when he'd been outside, his exact location, and even that he'd taken a Polaroid photograph. When Barker arrived at Henderson's house, tension hung in the air. The yard held only an old sedan. Inside, Henderson nervously shared his story. The men had entered without invitation just after sundown, never identifying themselves. The visitors made a cryptic comment about Henderson's photograph, suggesting it would fade into insignificance. Barker examined the image and found it unnaturally pale, just a faint, circular outline against an almost white background. An eerie silence filled the room, with only the wall clocks ticking breaking the stillness. Through the window, Barker spotted a black sedan at the edge of the driveway. Two figures sat inside, faces turned toward the house. Henderson whispered, "That's them." Barker quickly gathered his notes and left. By the time he stepped outside, the car had vanished, only wind moving through the trees. Barker's research wasn't just about collecting stories. He sought underlying patterns, sensing that these reports were more than simple narratives. Strange visitors would arrive unannounced, bringing with them an unspoken message. Men in black cars would ask probing questions and tell witnesses to forget what they'd seen. By the late 1960s, Barker understood he was no longer just an observer. He had been in the hallway. He had seen the car. Like others before him, he knew the unwritten rule. Sightings were only part of the mystery. The real story was in what followed. Visits that didn't need explanation. Encounters that made it clear your story was no longer yours alone. Jim Carlisle went to Birdmarsh, near the Solway F, with his wife Annie and their young daughter Elizabeth to take family photographs. While sitting on the grass in a light blue dress, Elizabeth became the subject of 3 camera shots. The middle frame revealed something extraordinary. A tall white figure standing behind her, with bulky shoulders and a smooth, rounded head. Neither Jim nor Annie had seen anyone in the area, and the marsh appeared completely empty. When the film was developed, the figure was unmistakable, Friends suggested taking the photograph to the police, but officials found nothing suspicious. Kodak confirmed the negative was a single, unaltered exposure. A local paper published the image, dubbing it the first spaceman, and national headlines soon followed. Templeton found himself fielding questions from journalists, offering no theories beyond the photograph itself. Unexpected visitors soon arrived. They came without warning, and Templeton noticed the cabinet holding Henderson's original letter was unlocked, something he never did. This became part of a recognizable pattern. A sighting occurs, a visit follows. Witnesses typically withdraw. Evidence often vanishes or becomes meaningless. The visitors always departed without names or credentials, leaving behind a message more potent than any direct threat. Barker's research revealed similar encounters. 2 experiences, one in a hotel hallway, another on a West Virginia back road, demonstrated that Bender's experience was not isolated. Each encounter shared common elements: a peculiar stillness in the air, compressed sound, pale faces, and flat voices. In his work, Barker wove Bender's story with others, creating what is considered the first public outline of the Men in Black. Critics challenged Barker's account, accusing him of embellishment. Supporters argued he had mapped the edges of a deliberate effort to obscure the UFO question. At the Carroll Fire Station, Templeton met 2 visitors who were tall, clean-shaven, and spoke with an unidentifiable accent. Introducing themselves only as numbers 9 and 11, they claimed government affiliation without specifying a department, communicating with a polite yet distinctly formal tone. The sedan felt charged with tension as they drove Templeton to Berg Marsh. 2 men sat in front, with Templeton in the back. Their conversation was terse, centered on the negatives and whether anyone else had seen them. At the marsh, their questioning became increasingly detailed. They asked about wind, aircraft, temperature, and sounds. Every minute detail seemed crucial. Templeton repeated his earlier statement to the police. The afternoon had been calm, with no one nearby and nothing unusual visible. One man repeatedly pressed him, asking if he was absolutely certain he hadn't seen anyone, even from a distance. Then came an unexpected question. Did Templeton believe the figure was connected to something he might have read in the news? He responded that he didn't know. The tone shifted. The men suggested he might be withholding information, which Templeton denied. After a brief, silent exchange of glances, they abruptly ended the questioning. They told him the matter was best forgotten, and left him standing alone on the marsh. Their visit haunted Templeton. Their refusal to identify themselves, the numeric references, and the suggestion to forget the entire incident left him deeply unsettled. In later interviews, he believed they were more interested in understanding what he knew and might reveal publicly. Not long after, an Australian reporter contacted him with startling news. Flaming figures resembling the one in his photograph had been spotted during a missile launch. Reportedly wearing white helmets, they were seen inside a restricted area, causing significant concern. A few months after the marsh incident, 2 more men visited his home. Identifying themselves only as investigators, they questioned him extensively about his memory of that day, probing with less formal intensity than their previous encounter. The photograph of the strange figure in the marsh continued to spark intense debate. Some skeptics argued it was simply Annie Templeton, her white dress washed out by bright sunlight. Yet proponents countered that the figure was distinctly different, taller, broader, with a helmet-like head and an unnaturally rigid posture. Both Templeton and Annie confirmed she was several yards away at the time of the photograph. Over subsequent years, Templeton received numerous letters from people reporting similar experiences. These individuals described encountering comparable figures in isolated locations, frequently near military installations or test sites. Many reported subsequent interviews by unidentified men, suggesting his experience might be part of a larger pattern. By the 1970s, the photograph had become widely known, featured in books and television programs exploring unexplained phenomena. UFO research communities informally termed these encounters Men in Black incidents. Speculation about the mysterious visitors' identities ranged from intelligence officers to private defense contractors. The proximity of Bird Marsh to military locations only deepened the intrigue. Templeton consistently recounted his experience with unwavering integrity. Two unknown men, formally dressed, had approached him unexpectedly, questioning him extensively, and urging him to forget what he had witnessed. UK testing raised questions about the encounter, with initial focus less on extraterrestrial possibilities and more on something unusual captured in the background, potentially sensitive equipment, personnel, or unauthorized test. Some researchers leaned toward paranormal explanations, viewing the figures as part of a deliberate effort to suppress unexplained sightings. Throughout it all, Templeton remained steadfast. He never sought to profit from his experience, refusing payment for exclusive rights and allowing only analytical copies of the photograph. Despite the disruption to his life, he never wavered from his original account of that day at the marsh. In late 1966, Point Pleasant, West Virginia, was a close community where daily life centered on local news, weather, and football. Everything shifted in November when residents began reporting a large winged creature near the abandoned TNT areas, old munition storage grounds, north of town. Initial newspaper reports quickly escalated as witnesses from all walks of life, farmers, shopkeepers, young couples, and even a school teacher began experiencing strange encounters. Polite yet deeply unsettling visitors dressed in dark clothing started appearing, showing an unnatural curiosity about the reported sightings. Mary Haya, the Point Pleasant correspondent for the Athens Messengers, became the central figure documenting these extraordinary accounts. Her typical reporting on local events like floods and county fairs transformed into something far more compelling. Her office gradually became a repository of surreal testimonies, shadows sweeping low over barn roofs, red lights drifting across rivers. One of the earliest accounts came from a farmer who described seeing a winged figure in his pasture at dusk. Days later, two tall men in dark coats and hats arrived, raising more questions than answers. Decades later, the Solway case remains a fascinating intersection of photographic evidence and mysterious official interest. Analysts unanimously agreed the negative was genuine, though they disagreed on interpreting the figure's nature and the reason behind these visits. Lingering questions persisted. If the figure was human, who were they? If not of earthly origin, why were inquiries discouraged? The case exists in an ambiguous realm, neither conclusively debunked nor proven. For enthusiasts of photographic mysteries, it represents a rare image that survived technical scrutiny while introducing more questions than answers. Ultimately, the encounter serves as a reminder that the most intriguing aspects often involve not what appears in an image, but who arrives asking questions afterward. The local community was experiencing a series of deeply unsettling encounters. People from all walks of life reported strange interactions with mysterious individuals who seemed to know intimate details about their lives before any conversation began. A teenage witness described two men in matching coats who approached him, revealing private information they shouldn't have known. They recited details about his dog's name, his sister's workplace, and even his mother's birthday. Their approach wasn't inquisitive, but methodical, as if verifying facts they already possessed. A hardware store owner had a similar experience. After mentioning an unusual figure on his roof, two unidentified strangers visited his store near closing time. They interrogated him about deliveries, trucks, and timing, without introducing themselves or making any purchase. These encounters weren't isolated incidents. A shop assistant discovered her written statement about red lights over the river had mysteriously disappeared from her desk. A farmer was visited by two men in a black sedan who asked probing questions about his initial report. subtly suggesting he keep quiet. One particularly chilling interaction involved a woman who had reported strange lights moving over the Ohio River. Two men appeared at her door after dark, their car quietly idling nearby. They were polite, yet clinically precise, asking pointed questions about her observation. Strangely, they never wrote anything down, instead repeating her exact words back to her. Even more bizarre, when she looked outside moments after their departure, the street was empty, and she hadn't heard a car drive away. Similar peculiar incidents began with mysterious phone calls featuring silent lines that would remain open for extended periods, occasionally interrupted by an electronic beep before disconnecting. By January 1967, these experiences had caught the attention of researchers like Haya, whose desk drawers now held a growing archive of such strange encounters and witness accounts. The pattern suggested something unusual was unfolding in the community, leaving residents feeling watched and unsettled. 3 visitors arrived over 3 consecutive nights, never moving during daylight hours. They stood out with their distinctive presence. Their interactions were controlled and deliberate, from their clipped, formal language to their precise body movements. Local law enforcement knew something unusual was happening. A county deputy admitted witnesses had been contacted before he could investigate. A state trooper reported seeing a dark sedan with out-of-state plates near the TNT area. Late one night, its engine running, but no occupants visible. As encounters continued, they shifted from information gathering to narrative control. Witnesses felt subtle but clear pressure. They were told directly they were mistaken and discouraged from speaking to reporters. Something significant lurked just beneath these seemingly random interactions. In Point Pleasant, those who encountered the mysterious winged figure experienced profound psychological impact. Some became so overwhelmed they completely withdrew from public discussion. A young couple, among the first to report their encounter, became so distressed they would only answer calls from recognized numbers. Decades later, the husband simply explained, "We didn't want to deal with it anymore. The social pressure was immense. It wasn't worth enduring the suspicious looks or unexpected visits." A retired railroad worker, after providing a detailed account of a nighttime encounter, abruptly stopped discussing the incident when asked why. His blunt response was that he didn't need the trouble. December 1967 marked an intensification of strange events. Witnesses reported repeated questioning in the days leading up to the Silver Bridge collapse. On December 15th, which killed 46 people in the freezing Ohio River, interrogations bizarrely focused on bridge traffic and crossing times with no clear explanation. After the bridge incident, winged figure sightings and most visitor encounters abruptly stopped. Only a few witnesses received follow-up calls asking about unusual observations. Paradoxically, this ending brought no comfort, instead leaving those involved with more questions than answers. A mysterious campaign swept through Point Pleasant over 13 months, marked by unusual aerial sightings and direct encounters with witnesses. The identity of these visitors remained shrouded in uncertainty, with theories ranging from federal agents to unknown organizations. What united the accounts were striking consistencies. Dark cars on rural roads, men dressed almost identically, using formal speech and asking precise questions. Rex Heflin, a seasoned highway inspector, encountered something extraordinary one August afternoon in 1965 while working on Mifford Road. Checking radio equipment in his government truck, he spotted an unusual sight beyond the railroad tracks. A disc-shaped object hovering silently against the California sky. Metallic and broad, it moved with an unsettling precision, drawing on his professional training of documenting everything. Heflin grabbed his Polaroid camera. He captured 3 photographs, one showing a smoky ring-like trail curling through the air. The object suddenly tilted, accelerated, and disappeared as quickly as it appeared. The developed photographs were compelling. A structured disc with a domed center was clearly visible, tilted against the horizon. When Heftlin first shared the images with colleagues at the California Division of Highways, reactions ranged from laughter to genuine concern. No one could deny the photograph's clarity. Within days, the Santa Ana Register printed the images, which began circulating nationally. These encounters left an unmistakable impression of surveillance. Witnesses were left with haunting questions about their targeting and the visitors' true purpose. Mary Hyre meticulously preserved her files until her death in 1970. Later researchers discovered something intriguing. Sighting reports and visitor accounts were often intertwined, sometimes occupying the same page. The legacy of these encounters continued to provoke speculation and wonder, a testament to an extraordinary period of unexplained events. The unidentified flying object was just the beginning. What followed was far more unsettling. Heftlin's photographs of the mysterious sighting had thrust him into the spotlight, transforming a routine roadside encounter into something extraordinary. Researchers and curious readers flooded him with letters and calls, marking his experience as one of the decade's clearest UFO encounters. A phone call from a NORAD representative would change everything. The voice was calm and mechanical, explaining that the Air Force needed the original Polaroids for analysis. Something felt off. The conversation seemed rehearsed, like a carefully prepared script. Despite his reservations, Heftlin agreed to hand over the images. Soon after, 2 men arrived at his office. Tall, dressed identically in black suits with narrow ties and crisp white shirts, they embodied an unsettling presence. Their pale faces remained expressionless, movements precise and deliberate. No badges, just an absolute certainty. "We're here for the photographs," one said to Heftlin, the words hanging in the air with an unnerving weight. When he sought an explanation, their response remained frustratingly vague. Their polite yet authoritative tone left no room for argument. Reluctantly, Heftlin retrieved the Polaroids from his desk. The men thanked him briefly, turned in perfect synchronization, and walked out to a black sedan waiting in the government vehicle lot. From his office window, Heftlin watched them depart, the car moving silently away from the base. The mysterious visitors had come and gone, taking with them the only tangible evidence of his extraordinary experience. These men represented something darker than a simple government inquiry. Their arrival turned a straightforward UFO sighting into a narrative of intrigue and unexplained intervention, leaving Heftlin with more questions than answers. A highway inspector's life changed forever after a mysterious encounter. 2 men in suits appeared at his door, asking precise questions about photographs he'd taken. These weren't just ordinary snapshots. They were Polaroids of a structured object that NICAP researchers considered extraordinary evidence. The black sedan began showing up everywhere, sometimes across from his home, other times near his office. 2 figures always sat inside, watching. His daughter remembered the day they first arrived, their movements unnervingly synchronized. The Air Force, through Project Blue Book, dismissed the case, claiming the photos could be staged. But this stance seemed suspicious. If the photographs were truly worthless, why would NORAD and OSI agents come to seize the originals? Why would his family endure silent surveillance? Something shifted after their visit. Heftlin became a different person. He started circling blocks before entering his driveway. At work, conversations would mysteriously halt when he entered. Colleagues whispered warnings about an Air Force investigator making inquiries. Dinners at home grew tense. He would pause mid-meal, scanning the street, always watching. His friends noticed he had become quieter, more guarded. He measured words carefully, withdrew from public discussions about the photographs. To a confidant, he later revealed the unspoken truth. "They just needed me to..." The sentence hung unfinished, suggesting a deeper, more complex story beneath the surface. The psychological pressure had fundamentally altered his existence, turning a routine documentation job into a life of constant vigilance. The story of Rex Heflin reveals how extraordinary encounters can be swiftly erased from history. His photographs of an unidentified object in the sky were more than just images. They were evidence that would dramatically alter his life's trajectory. Something extraordinary had happened, following a pattern witnessed in countless other accounts. A witness documents an unexplained event, and then mysteriously, official-looking men arrive. When these men appeared, silence descended. No words were needed. Their presence alone communicated a clear, unspoken threat. Decades later, digital scans of Heflin's surviving Polaroids underwent expert analysis, which found no signs of manipulation. The images appeared genuine, showing a structured object against the sky. Yet the most critical original photographs were never seen again. Why would individuals allegedly connected to NORAD and OSI work so intensely to recover photographs the Air Force publicly deemed inconclusive? Why did Heflin's family endure silent surveillance if the incident was meaningless? Today, Mifford Road looks like any ordinary Southern California street, with commuters passing without a second thought, concealing the extraordinary moment that occurred above it. For Heflin, the true significance wasn't just the disc he captured on film. It was about the precise, nameless men who arrived afterward, moving like shadows in daylight, leaving no documents, no official trace. Only the absence of photographs and an oppressive silence remained. What emerged was more than an image. It was a chilling reminder of how evidence can vanish and how quietly a life can be reshaped by unseen forces. The photographs spoke once, but their silence has lasted far longer, and perhaps that silence was always the point. Their research into unexplained phenomena had always attracted strange attention, but by 1966, something felt different. Phone calls became increasingly bizarre, with technicians finding no technical issues. Ralph and Judy Rankin were dedicated UFO researchers, their home a testament to their commitment. Filing cabinets overflowed with letters, reports, and witness statements that filled their living room and study. Subtle disruptions had been building for months. Faint clicks and unexpected silences interrupted their conversations. These were not random occurrences. They were part of a growing civilian network dedicated to documenting and sharing information about unexplained events, supporting those brave enough to speak out. One evening, the situation escalated dramatically. Judy answered a phone call that sent chills down her spine. A voice repeated her previous conversations word for word before suddenly hanging up. Around the same time, Ralph began noticing unfamiliar vehicles near their house. A black sedan with tinted windows would appear multiple times, parked just far enough away to seem coincidental but never staying long enough to confront directly. Their investigation had transformed from a passionate research project into a personal experience of mysterious surveillance. Something or someone seemed intent on silencing them. They were no longer just researchers. They had become subjects in a mystery they were struggling to understand. The late afternoon stillness shattered when two men in dark suits knocked on their door. Ralph answered to find two pale-faced men with fixed gazes and narrow ties. "We understand you've been collecting information," one said in a flat, emotionless tone. The men requested entry, and the Rankins, feeling uneasy but remaining polite, stepped aside. Moving deliberately, the visitors scanned the walls, cabinets, and neatly stacked folders. Their interrogation began immediately. Questions flew rapid fire. Where did they obtain their files? Who were their sources? Did they know witnesses personally? What was the nature of their photographic evidence? The tone was clinical, systematic, leaving no room for casual conversation. The visit began like any other inquiry, yet quickly devolved into something deeply unsettling. Ralph and Judy Rankin's UFO research had always been a labor of passion, but now it felt infiltrated by an unknown, menacing presence. Two men arrived with an air of cold professionalism. Their faces were expressionless, almost robotic, completely devoid of human emotion. When Judy offered tea, they didn't even acknowledge her. What truly unnerved the couple was the visitors' uncanny knowledge of private details, names and case descriptions that had never been publicly shared. Ralph's attempt to understand their sources was met with a cryptic response. "We have our ways." For nearly an hour, these mysterious men questioned the Rankins, taking meticulous notes in small black pads. No credentials, no explanations, just a methodical interrogation. After departing in a dark sedan that melted into suburban streets without headlights, the aftermath became apparent. Their living room felt violated. Drawers stood slightly ajar, papers subtly displaced. Nothing was stolen, but everything felt contaminated by an invisible touch. That night, Judy's sense of safety crumbled. The initial knock had seemed routine, but the encounter was anything but normal. The men spoke with authoritative tones, yet provided no proof of identity or purpose. Their UFO research, once driven by genuine enthusiasm, now became a source of profound anxiety. Strange phone calls followed, silent lines, or eerie echoes of Judy's own voice. Ralph grew increasingly suspicious that their communications were being monitored, their letters potentially intercepted. Gradually, they withdrew completely. Meetings stopped. Correspondence ceased. When colleagues inquired about their sudden retreat, they offered only vague explanations. "We've had some pressure. Best we step." The transformation was complete. Once passionate researchers, they now avoided UFO discussions entirely. Judy's fear was especially acute. Constantly tensing at every unexpected sound or passing car, haunted by the memory of those emotionless men who had so thoroughly disrupted their lives. Ralph felt a deeper burden, believing he had failed not just himself, but the entire research community built on mutual trust. Their story spread quietly through UFO research circles, revealing a chilling phenomenon that extended far beyond sky observations. The Men in Black intervention targeted researchers, penetrating personal spaces through telephone lines and correspondence, reaching into the very threshold of one's home. Ralph and Judy had never sought fame, only truth. But their passionate research attracted attention from unnamed forces, transforming their exciting endeavor into a source of profound dread. Friends noticed the change. Ralph became increasingly reserved, while Judy seemed constantly vigilant, often glancing nervously at windows during conversations. Their decision to withdraw wasn't made lightly. They believed continued involvement might invite more intrusive visits and escalating fear. The suppression went deeper than removing photographs or confiscating negatives. It was about intimidating those building networks of inquiry. Rank and silence spread outward, cutting communication lines and weakening research communities. The Rankin case became a stark reminder of the potential consequences for those who dig too deeply into unexplained mysteries. The Men in Black phenomenon reached far beyond accidental witnesses, extending to those who pursued truth and gathered evidence others tried to suppress. For NYEP, this account became an archive entry, a cautionary tale about risks faced by ordinary citizens, stepping into shadowy territories of secrecy. For the Rankins, it marked a quiet turning point that ended their work. Today, their names remain obscure, known only within UFO research circles. The house has changed hands, its new occupants unaware of past investigations, or pale-faced visitors who once crossed its threshold. Yet the encounter endures as a quiet warning. The threat isn't just silencing those who see, but those who seek. Evidence can vanish, and the pursuit of truth can come at a profound personal cost. At the heart of some stories lies a chilling truth about how curiosity can be silenced. For Sheila Franklin, an ordinary office secretary in Indianapolis, this became terrifyingly real in July 1978. While driving home one evening, she witnessed something extraordinary, a disc-shaped craft, hovering silently above a field, its edges glowing with an otherworldly light. The craft hovered briefly before shooting upward and vanishing, leaving her stunned. The next day, she shared her experience with a coworker, who encouraged her to document the sighting and contact an investigator. Sheila made a brief phone interview and thought the matter was concluded. She couldn't have been more wrong. Just after sunset, a sharp knock disrupted her quiet evening. 2 men stood on her porch, dressed in dark suits inappropriate for the summer heat. Their faces were pale, expressions unnervingly flat. When she opened the door, one spoke her name with a chilling certainty, as if they had known her for years. "We need to speak about what you saw," he said, his low voice carrying an authoritative weight. No identification was offered, no explanation given for their knowledge. They entered her home with an unsettling confidence, their presence oppressive. These men demonstrated an unnerving familiarity with details she had not publicly shared, the exact date, her driving route, even her conversation with her coworker. In that moment, Sheila understood that true danger wasn't what she had witnessed, but who had come to erase it. The Rankin story reveals how quickly a search for truth can be transformed into a reason for silence. When investigators themselves become afraid, the silence grows deeper and more complete. Nodella's life unraveled after her encounter at the window, where she watched the lights fade away into the night. Days passed, but the feeling of being watched never left her. Subtle changes began to emerge. A dark, unmarked car would idle down her street, 2 figures sitting inside, always disappearing the moment she considered approaching. The interaction with 2 mysterious men earlier had been deeply unsettling. Their questioning felt less like genuine inquiry and more like verification. Each query seemed calculated, as if they already knew the answers. One carried a small notepad, never writing anything down, while the other sat rigidly, staring unblinkingly. Sheila later described their speech as mechanical, like listening to a rehearsed recording. Her phone started behaving strangely with clicks and odd echoes during conversations. When she mentioned these occurrences to a coworker, she received a nervous laugh and a dismissive comment about government secrets. The joke did nothing to ease her growing unease. Her behavior shifted dramatically. Evening walks stopped. She checked the street carefully before opening her front door, and her once friendly demeanor became guarded and subdued. Something had changed fundamentally. Her home showed signs of intrusion. A lamp slightly moved. Papers on her desk rearranged. Most critically, her notebook detailing her sighting had vanished. When she told a close friend, her voice trembled with certainty. "They came back when I wasn't here," she whispered. During their initial encounter, the men advised her firmly to forget what she had seen. Their words weren't shouted or overtly threatening, but carried an unmistakable weight of warning. After a brief, tense interaction, they abruptly left, walking to a black sedan that moved with an unnaturally quiet smoothness. The pressure mounted quickly. To her family, she claimed she had simply said too much and needed to drop the subject. Her sister's persistent questions were met with a tightened facial expression and a cryptic warning. "You don't understand." Her fear manifested in increasingly paranoid behaviors. She unplugged her phone at night and stopped answering. The entire encounter emerged not from a desire for publicity, but because friends and family noticed a change in her afterward. She reluctantly shared her account with UFO field investigators, who carefully documented her testimony. She stopped opening doors unless she recognized the visitor. Her entire demeanor had shifted dramatically. Friends who had known her for years noticed a profound transformation in Sheila's behavior. She now lived with an underlying current of anxiety, constantly on edge as if expecting something terrible to happen at any moment. Newton investigators found her visibly anxious and reluctant to share details. While she confirmed the basic facts of her sighting and acknowledged the 2 men's visit, she was hesitant to elaborate further. "They told me not to talk," she would whisper, her voice barely audible. Coworkers observed a stark change in her interactions. She retreated from casual conversations, stopped sharing lunch breaks, and frequently gazed out windows with a distant, haunted look. One colleague recalled her whispering, "It's not the light I'm afraid of. It's the men." Researchers were deeply unsettled by the mysterious visitor's precise knowledge. These individuals referenced her intention to continue with the UFO group, information she had never discussed beyond a single phone call. Local police unequivocally denied sending any officers to her home or having a reason to intervene. If not the police, then who were these men? They carried themselves with official confidence, yet no agency claimed them. Their warnings were firm, but their presence left no trace. For Sheila, this contradiction was unbearable. She desperately wanted to believe someone would offer protection or explanation. Instead, she encountered only denial and silence. Her case never became a headline. No newspapers covered it. No national television show highlighted her experience. Yet, among researchers, her story became a quiet reference point, illustrating how men in black operations had transformed by the late 1970s. Unlike earlier UFO encounters documented with photographs and physical evidence, Franklin's experience represented a new approach, silencing ordinary witnesses who dared share their observations. She possessed no photographs, no debris fragments, no dramatic abduction narrative. Her testimony alone was enough to provoke a visit from men determined to ensure her silence. Her fear persisted long after the initial sighting. Friends noted, she avoided discussing the experience for the rest of her life. When approached by sympathetic researchers, she would only retreat further into her shell of silence. Sheila Franklin's encounter on an Indianapolis street in 1978 transformed her life forever. What began as an ordinary day became extraordinary when two men arrived at her door, entering without invitation. A black sedan waited silently at the corner, its headlights muted, its purpose unexplained. Researchers tracked her dramatic transformation after this encounter. Her once open nature collapsed into deep withdrawal. She became a woman who understood the power of silence, driven by an encounter that left invisible but profound marks. The pale-faced visitors spoke her name with an intimacy that suggested they knew her entire history. Their warning wasn't a direct threat, but something more insidious, a weight that settled into her bones, communicating she should forget what she had seen. They made it clear they already knew her most private details. Her light in the sky became secondary to these mysterious men who seemed to control her narrative. The Franklin case represents more than just an isolated incident. It reveals a broader pattern running through decades of men in black encounters. Evidence vanishes. Witnesses retreat. Silence replaces testimony. This phenomenon wasn't limited to high-profile UFO investigations, but reached into the lives of ordinary people, reminding them that what they witnessed was not truly theirs. For Muon investigators, her story was troubling not just for its specific details, but for what it exposed about systematic witness suppression. Were these visitors government agents, or something else entirely, entities that merely wore human form? Their presence left no record, their words left no trace, yet their effect was undeniable. Ultimately, Sheila Franklin's legacy is one of imposed silence. She saw something in the sky and initially told the truth. Then the knock came, the men entered, and silence spread. In the late 1970s, something strange unfolded in the quiet streets of Illinois. Dan Sherman's life took an unexpected turn following a UFO sighting, a glowing oval object that silently drifted across the night sky before vanishing into clouds. What seemed like a routine report to local authorities quickly evolved into something far more sinister. Weeks after his initial sighting, Sherman noticed a dark sedan consistently parked at the end of his street. Two motionless figures sat inside, their presence both unsettling and constant. The car appeared at odd hours, late at night when the street fell silent, early morning as he left for work. When Sherman approached, the men remained unnervingly still, their faces pale and features strangely rigid. His home became a landscape of subtle disturbances. Drawers left slightly open, chairs moved inches from their original positions, papers shuffled in ways he hadn't arranged. Nothing was missing, yet everything felt examined, as if unknown eyes had carefully studied his personal space. The strange car continued to appear, sometimes with out-of-state plates, sometimes without any plates at all. Sherman began documenting everything meticulously. He sketched license plates that seemed to blur when he tried to focus, marked dates in a notebook, and tracked the increasingly bizarre occurrences. His phone started acting strangely, with calls interrupted by bursts of static. These men, with their blank faces and flat voices, lingered in his consciousness long after they had gone. What started as a brief, seemingly inconsequential moment transformed into a persistent, quiet surveillance that gradually eroded Sherman's sense of normal life. He became convinced he was being watched by something far beyond ordinary observation. One haunting moment stood out. Watching one of the men turn his head in a slow, mechanical motion, meeting Sherman's eyes without a hint of emotion. The men never spoke, yet their presence spoke volumes. They were systematically stripping away his peace, leaving Sherman increasingly paranoid and uncertain about the true nature of what was happening to him. The silent phone calls started it all. Whenever Sherman picked up the receiver, an abrupt click would follow, suggesting someone had just disconnected. Despite inspecting the phone line, no explanation emerged for these disturbances. The car kept returning, its occupants waiting silently. Something felt deeply wrong about these men. They moved with an unnatural synchronization, their posture rigidly fixed. Neighbors noticed too. Some spoke of the car parked for hours without lights, while others described the men sitting motionless like stone statues. When Sherman suggested involving authorities, his neighbors were hesitant. "We'd only create trouble," they warned. Local law enforcement seemed equally disinterested. A patrol car once slowed near the sedan, glancing briefly before continuing without stopping. The vehicle appeared untouched, seemingly beyond normal scrutiny. Sherman's attempt to confront them directly proved equally strange. Walking slowly, he watched for any reaction. The men inside remained absolutely still. Only when he approached within 20 feet did the sedan suddenly start, its headlights flashing before driving away with deliberate smoothness. This experience fundamentally changed Sherman. He began altering his routines, circling blocks before turning onto streets, and keeping lights on in every room. Sleep became fragmented, interrupted by imagined sounds or distant engine hums. His friends witnessed his transformation. Once social and outgoing, he grew withdrawn, his conversations increasingly consumed by a pervasive feeling of being watched. "I don't mind them asking questions," he told a confidant. "What I mind..." His world gradually unraveled. Holiday gatherings faded into memory as he avoided leaving his house empty. Family members observed his decline. A cousin noted his diminishing social interactions, while his sister remembered hushed phone calls, as if someone might be eavesdropping. The surveillance infiltrated every aspect of his life. No beings had entered his home. No words were spoken. Yet an unseen presence systematically destroyed his sense of security. Eventually, Sherman stopped reporting these incidents. He believed he wasn't worth the attention. His case existed in a peculiar administrative landscape, especially since Project Blue Book had ended in 1969. After leaving the Air Force, Sherman's UFO investigation continued unofficially. Despite no official program, regional UFO groups remained interested in his experience. His encounters defied standard protocols. Local investigators speculated about potential FBI involvement, recognizing a pattern reminiscent of the infamous Men in Black. These mysterious figures communicated through intimidating silence rather than direct questioning, seeking clarity. Sherman approached a local police captain he knew. Initially met with laughter when asking about unmarked cars, the captain's demeanor shifted when pressed about outside agency involvement. "If they are," he warned ominously, "you wouldn't want to know." By the second year, Sherman's world had transformed. Trust disintegrated completely. His notes became increasingly erratic, filled with sketches of cars that seemed to materialize and vanish inexplicably. Every routine felt compromised. Neighbors transformed into potential informants. Paranoia grew with each unexplained incident. He found his radio mysteriously tuned to unfamiliar frequencies. The back door would be ajar, despite being certain he had locked it. Nothing was ever stolen, but the silence was overwhelming. These incidents eroded his sense of security. The worst part, he later reflected, was the men's absolute silence. They never directly confronted him, only demonstrated their presence. This psychological warfare made him question his own perceptions. Had he really locked the door? Was the chair moved, or always there? Reality and manipulation blended until uncertainty consumed him. Sherman gradually withdrew from UFO discussions. He stopped attending local meetings, ignored researchers' letters, and cut communication with close friends. His silence was not born of disbelief, but of self-preservation. "They want me quiet," he told one correspondent, before vanishing. The mysterious presence eventually faded. Their visits became less frequent, occurring only once every few months before disappearing completely. Sherman's reputation as a witness gradually diminished, and his case slipped into obscurity. In the quiet streets of Illinois, Sherman's story unfolds, a testament to the subtle psychological manipulation that marks men in black encounters. His experience began with something unusual in the sky, a sighting that would reshape his life. Unlike more dramatic harassment cases, his was characterized by an omnipresent car, unexplained phone line clicks, and a sense of being constantly observed. The Westmoreland County UFO wave of October 1973 provides context for Sherman's experience. Pennsylvania became a hotspot, with reports flooding in from September through November. Hunters, farmers, and police officers all described encounters with strange lights and mysterious men in dark suits. These visitors moved with mechanical precision, their flat voices and unwavering certainty hinting at something beyond ordinary investigation. For Sherman, the aftermath was more impactful than the initial sighting. "It wasn't what I saw that changed me," he would later reflect. "It was what came after." The power of silence became his new reality. A dark sedan would park nearby. Objects would inexplicably move, and an unspoken message became clear. "Do not speak." Researchers tracking men in black activity saw Sherman's case as part of a larger pattern. Where government interest and something stranger intersect, these encounters blur traditional boundaries. The men who arrived asked questions that probed far beyond casual conversation, appearing impossibly informed about events they should not have known. When these mysterious visitors departed, silence descended. No identification, no explanation. Just an implied threat. Lights would vanish, leaving only memories. Sherman streets, now indistinguishable from any other Midwestern neighborhood, hold the quiet echo of an encounter that transformed his understanding of surveillance and control. The phenomenon was not just about UFO sightings. It was about the psychological mechanism of suppression, where presence itself becomes a powerful tool of intimidation. In Westmoreland County and beyond, these encounters revealed a deeper layer of unexplained interaction, where silence became safer than speech, and observation more potent than direct confrontation. Stan Gordon, a young investigator from Greensburg, was at the center of a wave of strange encounters sweeping across Pennsylvania. His phone never stopped ringing, and his notebooks overflowed with witness statements. County maps were covered in pins marking mysterious sightings. Farmers and families reported bizarre experiences with glowing objects silently moving through fog and night skies. state troopers chased unidentified craft that would suddenly shoot upward and vanish without explanation. Local newspapers published stories of multiple witnesses seeing strange aerial phenomena. Police dispatchers logged inexplicable calls about objects moving with impossible speed. One farmer described a disc hovering with uncanny precision. Scorched and flattened grass marked potential landing sites in photographs, but the encounters went beyond mysterious aerial objects. Shortly after initial reports, witnesses described unsettling follow-up visits from unusual men. These visitors arrived in dark suits, asking precise and unnerving questions. Their speech was flat, almost mechanical, as if they were learning human language in real time. The men seemed to know intimate details witnesses hadn't shared publicly. They would ask specific questions about the sightings. What time did the object appear? How many people saw it? Were photographs taken? When witnesses mentioned speaking to reporters, the visitors' demeanor would change, warning them to stop discussing their experiences. A retired steelworker who reported lights above a quarry received a visit from men claiming to represent the Air Force. They were intensely focused on whether he had taken photographs. When he said no, they immediately lost interest. Attempts to verify these encounters proved impossible. When one witness called Pittsburgh International's Air Force detachment, he was told no such investigators had been sent. No badges were shown, no official identification presented. Yet something about these men carried an authority that left witnesses unsettled and silent. These encounters created a mystery unlike anything Pennsylvania had experienced before, leaving families questioning what they had truly witnessed. Stan Gordon started noticing a disturbing trend in witness behavior. Calls that were once open and free-flowing now ended abruptly. People who had initially been eager to share their stories suddenly grew silent. Farmers retracted statements they'd previously given to reporters. Families that had described mysterious lights stopped answering questions entirely. One woman's experience particularly stood out. After reporting a glowing object near her property, she contacted Gordon in tears. Strange men had visited her home, asking invasive questions not just about the UFO sighting, but about her family, children, and daily routines. Their tone wasn't threatening, but their apparent knowledge was deeply unsettling. She felt they already knew everything about her, and then she refused to speak again. Another witness followed a similar pattern. A man who had proudly shown Gordon scorched ground where a UFO supposedly hovered became hostile during a subsequent visit. He now claimed the mark was from a brush fire, contradicting his earlier detailed account. Gordon believed he had been pressured to change his story. The official response remained minimal. Project Blue Book, the Air Force's UFO study, was in its final stages. By 1973, investigations had dwindled. Budgets were shrinking, and closure seemed imminent. The 1969 report had provided the rationale. UFOs posed no national security threat and didn't warrant further study. Yet sightings continued, especially in Pennsylvania, where reports kept flooding in. An initial encounter highlighted the strange tensions surrounding these incidents. When questioned, the mysterious men were direct. "We don't show papers. We ask questions." A local officer, unnerved, later checked with the Air Force Base. No one by that name existed. No one had been dispatched to conduct interviews. One family noted the visitors' unfamiliarity with local details. They mispronounced a township name and asked about road conditions any local would know. These errors convinced the family that these men were outsiders, possibly not who they claimed to be. Witnesses were often told secondhand that Air Force personnel might contact them. Those claiming such visits found themselves in an increasingly difficult and uncomfortable position. In Westmont County, mysterious visitors began moving through the area, leaving no trace behind. Their methods starkly contrasted with standard investigative protocols. While the Office of Scientific Intelligence, OSI, typically conducted interviews with clear documentation and credentials. These visitors operated without identification, paperwork, or records. Stan Gordon began probing military contacts, discovering no official teams had been dispatched to the region. Local police quietly confirmed the presence of these outsiders, men who appeared suddenly and vanished just as quickly, never coordinating with law enforcement. Researchers speculated NORAD might have been aware of the Pennsylvania sightings, with radar operators along the East Coast logging unusual returns that season. Unidentified objects performed impossible accelerations and maneuvers beyond known aircraft capabilities. Internal memos later revealed NORAD was sharing information with the Air Force during the final stages of Project Blue Book. Yet witnesses received no official acknowledgement. The origin of these visitors remained shrouded in uncertainty. Were they connected to official channels like OSI, Air Force Intelligence, or NORAD? Or were they something else entirely, mimicking authority while answering to no one? This lack of clarity became a form of psychological warfare. The community's transformation was profound and immediate. Witnesses who once spoke freely now felt hunted. Farmers stopped answering phones. Families kept curtains drawn, even during daylight. Children grew anxious at unfamiliar cars. A young couple who had reported a luminous craft near their farm told Gordon they had completely stopped answering phone calls, terrified of anonymous voices. A state trooper admitted off the record that he had been warned not to discuss a chase involving a glowing object, advice that effectively silenced him. Westmoreland County was gripped by a pervasive sense of paranoia. The extraordinary sightings were shocking, but the subsequent visits left an even deeper psychological scar. Residents felt not just watched, but systematically managed, their voices suppressed, their accounts erased through intimidation. Stan Gordon would later reflect on how these events fundamentally transformed the community's sense of security and trust. The hills and valleys of Westmoreland County bore witness to two mysteries: the unexplained phenomena and the chilling response that followed. In 1973, the Westmoreland County UFO wave became a pivotal moment in American UFO history, marked not by the sheer volume of sightings, but by the unsettling silence that followed. Pale men in suits would appear at doorsteps, speaking flatly and leaving behind an eerie stillness. Witnesses who might have provided crucial testimony retreated into fear, and cases that should have been meticulously documented were abruptly cut short. Gordon understood how easily extraordinary events could be erased. A single encounter witnessed by hundreds could be silenced by a few quiet visitors, more effectively than any official denial. This pattern echoed across continents, finding a parallel in Scandinavia during the 1950s and 1960s. In Norway and Sweden, strange lights in the sky were accompanied by equally strange encounters. Men who claimed to be officials would visit witnesses, speaking Norwegian with an unnatural rhythm, as if reading from a script. Standing stiffly in dark coats, they carried papers stamped with unrecognizable seals, their precise questioning what was seen, at what hour, how close the object came, left a lingering sense of unease that outlasted the sightings themselves. The post-war decade saw Scandinavia, particularly Sweden, neutral yet surrounded by Cold War tensions, become a focal point for unexplained aerial phenomena. From ghost rockets in the late 1940s to discs hovering over rural villages, the region was no stranger to mysterious acts. Norwegian military bases like Bodo tracked objects floating low over fjords, bringing these encounters into sharper focus by the 1950s. Today, the landscape looks unchanged. Farms and back roads dot the terrain, but the memories of those silent encounters remain etched into the collective memory of those who experienced them: ordinary people, farmers, fishermen, citizens, began documenting strange occurrences, transforming isolated incidents into a broader narrative of unexplained phenomena that continues to intrigue and mystify. Reports began emerging across Scandinavian regions of strange UFO encounters, with witnesses describing remarkably consistent interactions. Near Trondheim, a Norwegian farmer witnessed a disc-shaped object landing briefly in a field, accompanied by ground-shaking vibrations and a glowing rim. Days following this sighting, two unusual men arrived at his home, claiming official status. Their appearance was distinctive: dark, heavy clothing, and an abrupt demeanor. Speaking functional but awkward Norwegian, they aggressively questioned the farmer about the incident. When challenged to show identification, one produced a document with an unfamiliar seal that, upon closer inspection, contained misspellings and uneven typing. The men's primary focus remained intensely fixed on whether any physical evidence had been collected from the landing site. The farmer had actually pocketed a small metal shard, but strategically denied its existence. After a tense exchange and a meaningful glance between them, the visitors departed without further discussion. Weeks later, the metal fragment mysteriously vanished from a locked drawer. Similar encounters unfolded across the region. A Swedish fisherman near Umeå reported a luminous craft hovering over a lake and subsequently received a visit from two officials, claiming membership in a technical ministry that did not actually exist. Their questioning consistently followed an identical pattern, always probing about time, distance, and potential evidence. Witnesses began noticing increasingly peculiar details about these visitors. A Norwegian couple described two men arriving at their farmhouse at dusk, wearing long coats and hats. Though outwardly polite, the visitors' eyes seemed to meticulously analyze the husband's reactions. The wife later remarked that their faces appeared unnaturally smooth, almost devoid of expression. A Swedish school teacher who had collected student drawings of a daytime disk experienced equally strange interactions. The visitors' timing seemed deliberately off, pausing oddly between questions and resuming conversations mid-sentence. As reports accumulated, the pattern of these mysterious encounters became increasingly apparent, challenging conventional understanding of official investigation procedures, whether fishermen, farmers, or school teachers. Their experiences shared striking similarities. Visitors who seemed to follow a rigid, rehearsed approach that left profound psychological impressions. In northern Norway, a sinister pattern emerged around UFO encounters. Witnesses who once spoke openly began to retreat, their willingness to share stories fading like mist. A Trondheim farmer and a fisherman from Umeå, both previously eager to describe their experiences, now grew silent and evasive. The visitors displayed unsettling behaviors that immediately set witnesses on edge. One fisherman noticed these men seemed disconnected from local realities, asking about train stations in villages that had never known such infrastructure. Their questions suggested a studied knowledge that felt artificial and detached. Consistent reports described these encounters with an underlying sense of unease. Families spoke of black cars parked near homes for hours, moving only when directly confronted. Children were instructed to keep quiet, their silence enforced by an unspoken threat. A school teacher, disturbed by his students' drawings, locked them away, hinting at deeper unspoken truths. Official channels offered no comfort. At the Trondheim police station, officers swiftly dismissed documents as forgeries, pointing out misspellings and poor print quality. They claimed no investigations had occurred and failed to recognize any signatures. It wasn't the initial sighting that unnerved people, but the subsequent interactions. The Swedish couple who experienced scorched vegetation exemplified this trend. Despite neighbors reporting continued unusual aerial activity, they avoided all contact with journalists. A local constable privately admitted receiving multiple similar complaints, revealing a broader pattern of mysterious encounters. These visitors seemed to possess an unsettling level of specific knowledge. They asked precise questions about personal details, like exact bedtime hours. People who encountered them described men in suits who appeared after UFO sightings, then vanished without a trace. The encounters shared a chilling consistency. official dismissal, personal intimidation, and an overwhelming sense that some truths were better left unspoken. The Scandinavian Men in Black reports emerged as some of the earliest and clearest European documentation of a mysterious phenomenon. Across different regions, the pattern remained consistent. A UFO sighting would occur, witnesses would be questioned, and evidence would be subtly manipulated before silence was imposed. Witnesses were profoundly affected by these encounters. In small towns and villages where such stories were already suppressed through ridicule, these visits added another layer of intimidation. A Norwegian farmer felt the air had been stripped from his room. A fisherman became so terrified he avoided his own boat for months. A Swedish teacher described the interaction as surreal, comparing it to conversing with a photograph. Physical and emotional aftermaths varied widely. Some experienced dizziness, fatigue, and headaches. Others withdrew completely from social interactions. One woman was so shaken that she instructed her daughter never to discuss their family sighting, warning that the mysterious men would return if spoken about. The real story unfolded in quiet living rooms, where ordinary people confronted strangers who appeared authoritative but fundamentally did not belong. While the lights themselves left no permanent trace, the men who followed ensured any remaining evidence was erased or diminished. A Canadian family near Niagara Falls experienced such an encounter during a summer evening in 1967. Their peaceful walk was interrupted when they noticed unusual lights hovering above the misty landscape. The father would later recall how these spherical lights moved in ways no conventional aircraft could, darting across the sky and then holding perfectly still. His children wondered if what they saw was a firework or a star, but these weren't ordinary celestial objects. Fireworks don't hang motionless in the sky, and stars don't descend and glow through mist. For several minutes, the family watched, transfixed by the impossible. Their presence felt real yet eerily hollow, leaving witnesses unsettled and creating a sense that something was operating outside official channels. Days later, something unsettling occurred. The family's quiet encounter with strange lights near the river had seemed almost private, a moment captured by drifting mists and curious illuminations in the sky. But now, unexpected visitors would shatter that silence. Two men in precise dark suits appeared at their doorstep, black coats, white shirts, narrow ties, their appearance carefully constructed, their expressions devoid of warmth. "We'd like to speak with you about what you saw near the falls," one said. The father stood stunned. He had shared this experience with no one, not colleagues, neighbors, nor family. These strangers seemed to know everything without being told. Their presence felt like an invasion, less dramatic than the disc they had witnessed, but far more chilling. They moved through the living room with calculated calm, scanning photographs, examining papers, their gaze measuring every corner of the space. Questions came rapid and direct. What time did they arrive at the falls? How many people were present? Did they capture any photographs? Their interrogation felt clinical, detached, as if they were collecting data rather than hearing a personal account. The family's memory of that night remained a guarded secret. They spoke little, even to close friends. The men in black seemed to represent something beyond official channels. Their humanity felt incomplete, their intentions opaque. In the decades that followed, the farms and fjords of Scandinavia would retain little visible trace of such encounters. The ghost rockets of the 1940s became Cold War curiosities, the unexplained discs and lights of the 1950s and 60s fading into historical footnotes. Yet for this family, their experience remained a chilling reminder that strange phenomena crossed all boundaries. This became one of the few documented Men in Black cases in Canada, a story that did not end by the river, but followed them home, carried not by the mysterious lights they had witnessed, but by these pale, emotionless men who arrived afterward. They returned home unsettled yet silent, choosing to draw no external attention to their extraordinary encounter. The family's weekend at Niagara Falls had started like any other summer trip, but it ended with an encounter that would forever change their lives. After witnessing strange lights over the water, they were visited by men who seemed to know everything about their experience. These visitors appeared without warning, their demeanor official and stern. They asked precise questions about the sighting, their expressions unreadable. When questioned about photographs, the father firmly denied having taken any. The men exchanged a brief, unspoken look before nodding and leaving as quickly as they had arrived. The entire interaction lasted less than 20 minutes, but its impact was profound. Afterward, the family sat in stunned silence, each member replaying the conversation in their mind. They were haunted, not just by the men's appearance, but by the unsettling knowledge these strangers seemed to possess. That night, the children refused to sleep alone. The father remained awake in the kitchen, watching the dark street. Every passing set of headlights made him tense. Ordinary sounds took on an ominous quality, a creaking floorboard, the hum of the refrigerator. In the days that followed, neighbors noticed a dramatic change. The once outgoing family became withdrawn. Children no longer played freely in the yard. Curtains remained drawn, and when asked about their weekend, the parents gave vague, clipped responses. The UFO incident became a turning point. What was once an exciting, almost wondrous, shared secret transformed into a source of deep dread. The father, once sociable, grew increasingly private. He spoke less at work and avoided social gatherings. Any mention of UFOs visibly disturbed him. The mother became fiercely protective, refusing to let the children wander after dark. Years passed, and their story remained quiet until researchers documented the case in private notes. What lingered was not just the mystery of the lights, but the greater mystery of the visitors. The children, now grown, would later describe their unease. It wasn't just that these men knew what they had seen, but something more deeply unsettling about their presence. Ultimately, the family never reported the encounter to local authorities. The men who visited them flickered into existence and vanished just as quickly, leaving behind a profound sense of unresolved tension and unexplained fear. The summer of 1967 was a pivotal moment for UFO sightings in Canada. Throughout the country, civilian groups and government agencies like the Royal Canadian Mounted Police and the National Research Council were meticulously collecting reports of aerial phenomena. High-profile cases drew international attention, with incidents that defied conventional explanation. That summer, a family standing at the edge of Niagara Falls witnessed something extraordinary. Lights moved across the night sky with a speed that challenged understanding. What followed was more unsettling than the aerial phenomenon itself. Unlike many encounters, this family never filed a formal report, but their story became part of the rare accounts of Men in Black activity outside the United States. The night's events were characterized by an eerie contrast. The UFO was distant, silent, and fleeting. In stark opposition, the men who later arrived were close, deliberate, and unforgettable. They seemed more interested in what the family didn't do, searching for photographs that never existed, as if needing proof that no proof was taken. This incident was not isolated. Radar units along the U.S.-Canadian border had tracked unidentified aerial objects that summer, noting capabilities beyond known aircraft. In October, a glowing object crashed into the waters near Shag Harbor, Nova Scotia, with multiple witnesses, including local police. The Canadian Coast Guard searched the waters, while NORAD and Canadian authorities handled the case. Yet no official explanation was ever provided. Researchers noted an increasing frequency of sightings and an apparent pressure to suppress them. Men in Black reports in Ontario coincided with government tracking, suggesting witnesses were experiencing extraordinary events while simultaneously being warned into silence. Even years later, the memory of that knock at the door overshadowed the lights in the sky. For the family involved, the experience was deeply personal and transformative. Their children grew up with memories not just of strange lights, but of how their parents changed. While the Niagara Falls case never gained widespread fame, its quiet significance endures, demonstrating how the phenomenon transcended borders and appeared even in areas with limited official investigation. The morning started like any other for Da Silva as he set out in his small boat, continuing his lifelong routine of casting nets on the river. He had made this journey countless times before, his life a steady rhythm of fishing to support his family. But this day would be different. A strange glow began to rise above the riverline, faint at first, then growing brighter. Silva initially thought it might be the sunrise reflecting off the fog. Yet the light moved with purpose, descending toward him until it hovered directly over the river. A seamless metallic domed craft floated above his boat, silent without engine noise or air disturbance. A beam of light engulfed his vessel, and Silva felt his body lift, paralyzed and weightless. Fragmented memories emerged later. Figures resembling humans, but moving unnaturally. Strange instruments and panels, sensations of cold and pressure. These beings seemed to observe and communicate in unrecognizable sounds. His last memory was a sharp pain in his head, then nothing. When he regained consciousness, the boat rocked gently. The sun was high, his nets untouched, and hours had vanished. This bewildering event would have been haunting enough on its own, but for Silva, it was merely the beginning. Returning home, he was visibly shaken. His family noticed his disheveled appearance, his silence, the strange distraction in his eyes. Initially, he shared only fragments of his experience with them, but in a small community, secrets rarely stay hidden. The encounter mirrored similar experiences across North America. Researchers found the case particularly compelling due to consistent details. Black-suited men with pale faces asking mechanical questions and displaying knowledge no outsider should possess. These encounters were not confined to the United States, but appeared in locations like Ontario, Santa Ana, New Jersey, and Maine. Afterward, Silva and his family became more cautious, more private, more wary of strangers. The memory of an unexpected knock at the door became inseparable from the memory of those lights over the river. Today, millions of visitors watch the water plunge into mist at Niagara Falls, unaware of the extraordinary events that once unfolded there. For that family, the falls were no longer just a natural marvel. They became a stark reminder that what you see can follow you home, and that silence can be demanded not only by what hovers above, but by those who arrive afterward. The story spread like wildfire through the community. Regional newspapers sent journalists to press Silva for details, though he initially hesitated, embarrassed by the extraordinary nature of his account. Eventually he shared his tale, a fisherman taken aboard an unidentified craft, examined by strange beings, and returned with lost time. For researchers, this was another compelling piece in the growing collection of South American abduction reports. For Silva, however, the publicity felt like a painful exposure. Each retelling left him uneasy, as if speaking the words might somehow invite unknown consequences. Weeks later, those consequences arrived. One evening, walking home along a dusty road, Silva encountered two men whose presence seemed deeply out of place. They were impeccably dressed, dark suits perfectly pressed, white shirts precisely, shoes gleaming as though they'd just stepped from a city street. When they spoke, Silva immediately sensed something was wrong. Their Portuguese was technically correct, but delivered with an unnatural stiffness, like words recited from a memorized script. Their faces seemed almost mask-like, pale, expressionless, eyes fixed unblinkingly. No credentials were offered, no explanations given, just a clear, flat command. Stop speaking. Do not talk to reporters. Do not give in. Silva tried to insist on the truth, but the men responded by moving closer, their movements unnervingly synchronized. One leaned in inches from his face, repeating the instruction with mechanical precision. No verbal threats were made. Yet Silva felt profoundly threatened by their very presence. The encounter was brief, mere minutes, but its impact would reshape his entire life. That night, he told his family about the strange visitors. His wife remembered his trembling, his broken voice. His children recalled how he barred the doors, pacing restlessly and glancing repeatedly at the windows. From that moment, Silva changed completely. Reporters were turned away. Researchers found closed doors where he had once been sociable. He became withdrawn, a shadow of his former self. After his abduction, the fisherman's life transformed dramatically. Neighbors first noticed a heavy, quiet tension that seemed to envelop him. He had been open and sociable before, but now his demeanor was permanently altered. Night after night, he would pace restlessly through his home, constantly checking windows and scanning the road before venturing outside. His children remembered how he changed, no longer lingering in the marketplace, and always hyper-vigilant about his surroundings. Fishing became less frequent, as he preferred staying close to home, and traveling at night was now completely forbidden. Unfamiliar cars would park at the town's edges. Mysterious men would silently appear and disappear. The once steady fisherman now maintained absolute silence, with each conversation carefully measured. His experience rippled through the local community, creating a culture of hushed whispers and cautious warnings. Parents began warning children about strange lights. Neighbors spoke in subdued tones when the event was mentioned. The mysterious men who followed the encounter had spread a silence that extended far beyond the fisherman himself. His case became significant in UFO research, representing more than just a personal experience. It demonstrated that unexplained phenomena were not confined to the United States. The same dark-suited visitors seen in New Jersey and Maine were now walking dirt roads in Brazil. Years later, Brazil became the center of Operation Plate, one of the most extensive UFO investigations in history. In the Amazonian town of Caris, entire communities reported extraordinary encounters, beams of light from strange craft causing burns, illness, and deaths. The Brazilian Air Force documented extensive evidence, including photographs and radar readings, much of which remained classified until the 1990s. These files hinted at systematic efforts to manage witnesses and discourage open discussion. Whether through military channels or mysterious roadside encounters, the message remained consistent: silence. Dilva's experience bridged two critical aspects of the UFO phenomenon: an extraordinary encounter followed by systematic intimidation. It stood as one of the clearest South American examples of an abduction accompanied by men in black. José Antonio Dilva's story only gained its true meaning when viewed through a wider lens. What began as a personal encounter on the rivers of Minascar became a chilling narrative of silence and intimidation. Few now remember the morning Dilva returned home, shaken by an experience beyond comprehension, a craft that lifted him and vanished as quickly as it appeared. But what remained was far more haunting. The strangers who arrived afterward, their presence more powerful than any memory of lights in the sky. Neighbors recalled Dilva not for what he claimed to have seen, but for the lingering fear that seemed to follow him. He retreated into a cautious quiet, never seeking publicity again. His experience mirrored other accounts, witnesses in the Amazon who reported not just unexplained lights, but encounters with men warning them to stay silent. The rivers of Minascar continued to flow, carrying fishermen's nets and the weight of unspoken stories. The craft had come and gone, but the men had stayed, their impact evident in every cautious glance and uncomfortable silence. Years later, a similar pattern emerged with Ron Johnson, a respected UFO investigator based in Missouri. During a Moan meeting on June 9, 1994, colleagues watched in shock as Johnson, a healthy man in his early 40s known for his sharp mind, suddenly collapsed at the table. Johnson was no ordinary investigator. As a state section director, he managed local case files and had built a reputation for balanced investigation. Skeptical when evidence was weak, open when witness accounts carried weight. In the weeks before his death, he had shared stories of being warned by mysterious men. Their message brutally simple: stop asking questions. The official cause of his death remained a mystery. Toxicology offered no conclusive answers. Within the UFO investigator community, Johnson's sudden death was not seen as an isolated incident, but part of a larger, more troubling pattern of suppression and intimidation. Johnson was a go-to researcher for those seeking solid insights into unexplained phenomena. His work with UFO sightings spanned diverse scenarios, from mysterious lights to physical trace evidence. He had earned deep trust among witnesses across different professions. Farmers, teachers, and law enforcement respected his methodical approach. Rather than chasing sensational stories, Johnson documented everything with remarkable precision. His careful notes and organized files attracted attention from unexpected quarters. Colleagues knew him as someone who asked measured, intelligent questions. Weeks before his death in June 1994, Johnson experienced an encounter that would unsettle him profoundly. After a regional meeting, two men in dark suits approached him with an unusual interaction. They knew his name before introductions and guided him to a quiet conversation, away from the crowd. Their questions were deliberate and impersonal, focusing intently on physical evidence Johnson held, particularly race samples from a field where a disc had been reported. When he tried to understand their origins, they repeatedly claimed to be from official channels without offering any identification or credentials. The encounter took a more menacing turn when one man leaned close, subtly suggesting that pursuing certain investigative leads could be dangerous to his health. This interaction visibly affected Johnson. Colleagues noticed him returning to his table, shaken, nervously scanning the room, and hurriedly reorganizing his notes. In subsequent weeks, Johnson shared fragments of the story with trusted peers. Investigators later recalled him, describing the men as seemingly official, yet frustratingly undefined, with a clear interest in unpublished files. While he publicly laughed off speculation about mysterious suits, those close to him recognized the genuine anxiety behind his humor. Privately, this incident disturbed Johnson more deeply than any previous professional challenge, marking a significant and unsettling moment in his research career. Ron Johnson's work environment began shifting subtly. Colleagues noticed changes during meetings, where he once spoke freely but now communicated with careful restraint. His note-taking became guarded, documents kept closed until his designated speaking time, then quickly tucked away after discussions concluded. At home, his family observed strange new behaviors. He started drawing blinds earlier in the evening and meticulously checking the street before opening doors. His wife later acknowledged she never fully comprehended what was troubling him, only sensing he had become increasingly watchful and withdrawn. A close friend summed it up simply: Ron looked like a man who knew someone was monitoring his work. On the day of his death, Johnson attended a routine nuclear gathering. He wasn't presenting groundbreaking research or unveiling a major discovery, just contributing quietly and managing files as usual. During the meeting, he sipped from his glass. Minutes later, he convulsed violently. Witnesses described his collapse as sudden and shocking. Medical help arrived immediately, but nothing could be done. The MUF members present were stunned. Johnson had no known serious health issues, and his sudden public death seemed almost choreographed. The glass on the table became a focal point of speculation. Authorities moved quickly. Toxicology tests were conducted, but produced no conclusive results. No poison was detected, and no clear medical explanation emerged. The final report simply labeled it a sudden unexplained death. Police did not treat the incident as suspicious, viewing it as an unfortunate tragedy. When UF members raised concerns about prior warnings, officials dismissed them. One investigator noted the inconclusiveness was more troubling than a definitive answer. A natural cause could be accepted, but a collapse with no explanation, following weeks of reported intimidation, hinted at darker possibilities. The impact was immediate within the UFO research community. Johnson had been well-liked and widely respected. His 1994 death left a deep, unsettling mark, generating both profound grief and widespread speculation about the circumstances surrounding his sudden demise. The death of Ron Johnson sent tremors through Muon's investigative network. His passing sparked speculation. Some saw it as a medical tragedy, while others whispered about darker implications. Some stepped back from their work, declining cases with physical evidence, or becoming more reserved about sharing details. A few even withdrew completely from public UFO investigations. Johnson's wife later reflected on the uncertainty surrounding his death, unsure whether it was a coincidence or something more deliberate. She recalled her husband's belief that he had been warned, telling a colleague, "If he was right, someone out there knows more than we ever will." Witnesses Johnson had interviewed were subtly affected. Concerns about drawing unwanted attention grew, and many became hesitant to share information with Muon. Over time, his death became an unspoken chapter in MUFON's internal history. Researchers spoke of it carefully, without sensationalism, but never forgot its significance. His files took on new meaning. Every case he had touched was now examined through a lens of caution and potential risk. For the broader UFO research community, Johnson's story became a stark reminder that investigators, not just witnesses, could face intimidation. It highlighted the thin line between documenting extraordinary claims and potentially endangering oneself. Today, Ron Johnson's name is rarely mentioned outside specific circles. His death remains officially unexplained, yet unofficially linked to the mysterious visits he had described. The message was clear. There were boundaries in research that, once crossed, could have serious consequences. Johnson understood that UFO research involved more than investigating strange lights. The real depth came from encounters with mysterious figures whose presence left an indelible mark. Colleagues remembered a story that went beyond simple documentation, a narrative about warnings unheard and questions left unanswered. Hopkins was working through some case notes when a sudden phone call broke his concentration. The caller identified himself as a UFO research group representative and asked if Hopkins was alone. Once confirmed, he requested a visit to discuss the Stevens investigation. Hopkins agreed immediately, but something felt off as soon as he hung up. Seconds later, an impossibly quick knock came at the door, as if the caller had been waiting right outside. When Hopkins opened it, he encountered a figure that seemed more supernatural than human. The visitor wore a pristine black suit with a white shirt and black tie. His appearance was deeply unsettling. Hopkins noticed the stranger's unnatural characteristics immediately. Unnaturally pale, waxy skin, and a completely bald head without eyebrows created an eerie presence. His eyelashes looked artificial, and his lips seemed crudely painted with lipstick. Despite feeling uncomfortable, Hopkins invited the man inside. The conversation began with the visitor methodically questioning Hopkins about the Stevens case. His voice sounded flat and mechanical, creating a heavy atmosphere that pressed down on the room. At one point, he asked Hopkins to retrieve a coin from his pocket. Confused but compliant, Hopkins pulled out a copper penny. The stranger instructed Hopkins to place the coin in his palm and focus. As Hopkins stared, something extraordinary happened. The coin began to shimmer, blur, and then completely disappear. With chilling calmness, the visitor declared that the coin would never be seen again. For Hopkins, a trained scientist accustomed to observation and explanation, this moment shattered his understanding of reality. The visitor then revealed intricate details about the Stevens abduction case, information Hopkins had never shared publicly. Intimate knowledge from hypnosis sessions seemed to flow from the stranger, suggesting access to information through extraordinary means. The silence that followed echoed with unresolved questions. Colleagues withdrew, families wondered, and a community was left uncertain about the dangers lurking behind the pursuit of truth. For those involved, it was more than an investigation. It was a glimpse into something beyond normal understanding. His movements grew increasingly awkward. Words slowed and breathing became shallow. Hopkins watched as the visitor pulled out a small metallic device that looked like a lipstick case, using it in a way that suggested it was critical for breathing or communication. The encounter was marked by an unsettling clinical precision. A directive was issued: destroy all evidence related to the Stevens case, including notes and tapes. The instruction carried an implicit threat so certain that Hopkins felt compelled to comply. As the stranger prepared to leave, his movement toward the door seemed almost mechanical. Each step highlighted an unnatural awkwardness that reinforced Hopkins' growing suspicion that this visitor was not entirely human. A bluish light flickered, and Hopkins assumed the man had been collected by some unknown vehicle or phenomenon. Fear quickly overwhelmed his curiosity. He immediately began destroying his research material. The hypnosis tapes were erased, notes burned, his work on the Stevens abduction effectively abandoned. Later interviews revealed chilling details about the visitor's appearance. A mask-like face with features that didn't seem to belong to living skin. The lips appeared painted, skin stretched and waxy, with an absolute absence of hair. Physical details continued to unsettle him. Oversized shoes seemed ill-fitting, movements clumsy and uncoordinated, resembling a machine attempting to mimic human motion. Hopkins became convinced the visitor was not human, and this encounter fundamentally altered him. Though he continued practicing medicine, he completely withdrew from UFO research. He spoke about the incident cautiously, aware of potential ridicule. Yet those who knew him personally vouched for his sincerity and credibility. He was not a man who invented tales, and what happened that night had clearly disturbed him in a way no hoax could explain. For researchers of the Men in Black phenomenon, Hopkins' case became pivotal. It contained many hallmarks found in other reports: the sudden phone call, impossibly rapid arrival, artificial appearance, threat to abandon UFO research, and demonstration of strange abilities. Witnesses from across the globe consistently describe a peculiar type of official, human in appearance, but distinctly off. These figures demand silence and intimidate, seeming more like artificial constructs designed to enforce secrecy than actual government agents. The Men in Black mystery, echoed by Albert Bender's 1950s experiences and Hopkins' case, remains a haunting touchstone. Hopkins captured the unsettling nature of these encounters in a stark description that has resonated for decades. Talking to a machine, not a man, but a machine disguised as human. Skeptics tried various explanations. Some suggested an elaborate prank by a skilled illusionist with access to private notes. Others speculated about hypnagogic hallucinations. Yet these theories failed to address the consistency of testimony or the decades of overlapping MIB reports. What made Hopkins' case endure was not just the strangeness of the visitor, but Hopkins himself. He had nothing to gain and everything to lose: his professional reputation, credibility, and peace of mind. Despite this, he quietly but firmly maintained until his death that he had seen something real. This chilling account serves as a stark reminder that those who delve too deeply into UFO mysteries often find themselves confronted by forces determined to keep the truth hidden. In the fall of 1975, the small southern town of Girton, Arkansas, typically characterized by quiet community life, church gatherings, football games, and freight trains cutting across the countryside, experienced something extraordinary. On an ordinary evening, locals reported a series of bright darting lights over the woods and railroad tracks. These were not distant, mistaken points of light, but close, maneuverable, and silent phenomena. Witnesses described glowing spheres or elongated ovals with a faint bluish halo, moving in coordinated patterns at speeds far beyond conventional aircraft. Near the famous Gurin Light area, already known for ghostly light reports since the 1930s, a railroad worker provided a particularly compelling account, watching two glowing objects hover silently above the trees. In the small town of Gurdon, something extraordinary was stirring. It began with a sighting that would soon transform an ordinary evening into a whispered mystery, spreading through local diners and front porches. The first witness watched as strange lights in the sky split into two smaller lights before shooting upward and vanishing in a flash. Shaken, but compelled, he reported the incident to his supervisor, who then shared it with others in town. News traveled fast, and families began discussing the unexplained event with growing intrigue. Teenagers, driven by curiosity and a thirst for excitement, ventured into the woods, hoping to glimpse something remarkable again. But the story took an unexpected turn. A week later, when two unusual visitors arrived, late one evening, a knock at the door revealed two men in dark suits, an uncommon sight in this rural community. They were eerily similar, pale, expressionless, and moving with an unnatural stiffness. Claiming to be government investigators looking into aerial activity reports, their true intent quickly became clear. Their questioning carried a threatening undertone. One man flatly warned that continuing to discuss the lights could have consequences. The witness noticed peculiar details. One man rarely blinked, and when he did, it seemed like a calculated imitation of human behavior. Their speech was formal yet awkward, as if reciting rehearsed lines. As suddenly as they appeared, they vanished into a dark car parked on the roadside. But they were not alone in these strange encounters. Other witnesses began reporting similar experiences: mysterious phone calls with mechanical voices, or silent connections, and unexpected strangers appearing at workplaces to ask probing questions before disappearing without explanation. What truly unsettled the community was how precisely these visitors seemed to know who had witnessed the lights. People who had only quietly mentioned their experiences to neighbors or coworkers found themselves targeted. It felt like an invisible network was methodically tracking and silencing witnesses. These incidents were not unique to Gurdon. They echoed stories circulating in national UFO literature, suggesting a broader, more complex phenomenon at play. Dark vehicles with their headlights off and pale men in suits became a recurring nightmare for the residents of Gurdon. Strange encounters followed the mysterious lights that had appeared in the sky, creating an atmosphere of unease and silent intimidation. Witnesses across different states and countries reported remarkably similar experiences. Men with blank expressions and flat voices who seemed to know too much. Teenagers who had searched for these unexplained lights found themselves followed home, never getting close enough to identify the driver. Residents felt constantly watched, especially near the railroad tracks at night. When researchers began investigating, they discovered a community shrouded in fear and reluctance to speak. Those brave enough to share their stories described visitors who were more oppressive than directly threatening. One witness years later told an investigator that the lights themselves weren't particularly scary. They might have been from the Air Force or simply unexplained. But the men who followed were different. They didn't seem real and possessed knowledge that defied explanation. The Gurdon case became a whispered story among UFO researchers, a quiet narrative that lingered in local memory decades after the initial events. Like many Men in Black incidents, this case offered no physical evidence, no photographs, no official documents. Instead, it presented a recurring pattern. Witnesses who saw something extraordinary in the sky would subsequently receive visits from figures seemingly intent on suppressing their story. The consistency of these accounts across decades and continents lends weight to the narrative, despite skeptics dismissing it as small-town paranoia. Fundamental questions remain unanswered. If these were government agents, why the elaborate charade? And if not, what were they? Beings with a vested interest in keeping humanity ignorant of what flies in its skies. In 1975, fear overshadowed the truth for the people of Girton. Something inexplicable had occurred, and they were warned to keep silent. Most residents complied, allowing the story to fade into whispers and speculation. The world of UFO research carries dark, unsettling undertones that go far beyond typical investigations. Jerome Clark, a cornerstone in this field, distinguished himself by meticulously documenting cases with remarkable objectivity during the 1960s and 1970s, unlike many of his sensationalist contemporaries. Through extensive research, Clark revealed a deeply troubling pattern. Witnesses who reported UFO sightings frequently experienced targeted confrontations by men in dark suits, encounters that were anything but casual. These visitors spoke with an unnerving mechanical precision, seemingly intent on silencing those who had witnessed extraordinary events. One particularly chilling case involved a Minnesota couple in the early 1970s. After witnessing a glowing disc landing near their property, they were soon visited by two men who claimed government affiliation. The visitors appeared eerily identical, with expressionless faces and outdated clothing. Their interrogation was not about the craft's details, but focused intently on determining who else might have heard about the sighting. When the husband mentioned discussing the incident with a neighbor, one visitor delivered a thinly veiled threat. "It would be best for you and your family if this was the last time we left without explanation." Clark began compiling these reports in the late 1960s, a period marked by increased media attention and widespread sightings across North America. Through correspondence with witnesses and fellow researchers, he uncovered a systematic effort to suppress and silence those who dared speak about their experiences. The researcher's own work did not go unnoticed. Following a small-town library meeting where he discussed his discoveries, Clark received a late-night phone call. The voice, flat and almost mechanical, warned him about interfering with matters beyond his understanding and demanded he destroy his notes. These accounts were not isolated incidents. Clark uncovered reports from entire communities, suggesting a coordinated effort to maintain silence around UFO encounters. The consistency of these experiences across different locations and times formed a compelling and unsettling mosaic of suppression. The phenomenon threatened to fade into the obscure margins of UFO history, yet the haunting memory of men in black suits arriving unannounced in quiet towns continued to linger in the shadows of the unexplained. Multiple encounters with strange visitors formed a consistent pattern across various accounts. Iowa farmers described watching unusual lights silently moving across cornfields over several nights. Shortly after, families received visits from men dressed in black suits who introduced themselves as insurance investigators. Their questioning seemed less like an inquiry and more like a directive, with an implicit demand for silence. The encounters followed a chilling template. These visitors displayed unsettling characteristics: pale skin, unusual speech patterns, and an uncanny knowledge of events not yet publicly shared. Researchers like Clark found the accounts difficult to categorize, as the descriptions remained remarkably consistent across different locations and witnesses. Bizarre details emerged repeatedly. Some visitors spoke with mouths that didn't move naturally. Others offered coffee without drinking it, and stared blankly in ways that unnerved witnesses. Their vehicles, immaculate black sedans without license plates, would mysteriously appear and vanish from rural roads. An Illinois incident particularly stood out. A man reported that after two visitors warned him about discussing a filmed bright object, their car seemed to dematerialize, fading into thin air before reaching the road's end. This was not an isolated event, but part of a broader pattern. The intimidation was systematic. In one case, researchers found themselves under surveillance. Two men in a black car parked outside an office building for hours, never approaching but constantly watching. This pressure led the researcher to reduce public appearances and ultimately abandon the investigation. Witnesses came from diverse backgrounds: farmers, professionals, housewives, each reporting similar experiences. A farmer's statement captured the encounter's essence. "It wasn't like they were asking, it was like they were telling us what to do." The encounters left people feeling violated, with many choosing to remain silent or abandon their curiosity altogether. The consistency and strangeness of these accounts suggested something far beyond ordinary surveillance, hinting at a phenomenon that defied simple explanation. The Men in Black phenomenon fascinated researchers like Jerome Clark, who discovered a pattern beyond simple personal details. What mattered was proximity to a UFO sighting and the willingness to speak about it. When witnesses shared their stories, strange visitors often followed. Clark carefully studied the psychological impact of these encounters. While UFO sightings themselves seemed awe-inspiring, it was the Men in Black who truly terrified witnesses. Some skeptics argued these accounts were exaggerated memories of government agents, possibly from Project Blue Book. Others suggested they represented psychological manifestations born from fear and paranoia. Clark maintained a balanced approach. He documented cases without dismissing or fully embracing supernatural explanations, focusing instead on preserving testimonies for future study. Yet he acknowledged the unsettling implications. Whether human or something else, these figures seemed intent on controlling the narrative of unexplained events. The most chilling aspect was not their appearance, but the aftermath. Witnesses would fall silent. Researchers would retreat. Evidence would vanish. They were less enforcers of secrecy than embodiments of it. In the early 1950s, Albert K. Bender emerged as a pivotal figure in the UFO community. From his Bridgeport, Connecticut home, he founded the International Flying Saucer Bureau, AFSB, establishing one of the first civilian UFO organizations in the United States. Clark's extensive files revealed a consistent pattern spanning decades. From Bender's early experiences to Hopkins' later accounts, the Men in Black stories shared remarkable similarities. This collection became a crucial resource for researchers. Offering more than isolated stories, it provided a comprehensive view of a persistent, mysterious phenomenon. The flying saucer mystery had captured the imagination of many, and the International Flying Saucer Bureau, IFSB, was at the forefront of exploration. Founded by Albert Bender, the organization quickly attracted international members and published a newsletter delving into sightings and theories. Everything changed when Bender experienced an encounter that would alter his entire trajectory. 3 strange men in dark suits visited Bender's home in a manner that defied explanation. Their arrival was unexpected, and their communication supernatural. With glowing, hypnotic eyes, they transmitted a message directly into Bender's thoughts, a clear command to immediately cease his investigations. More than words, they instilled a profound sense of dread that left him deeply shaken. The result was immediate and complete. Bender disbanded the IFSB almost overnight, stopped all publications, and vanished from public view. His sudden silence puzzled colleagues and supporters who had watched the organization approach a promising expansion. Bender was not alone. In the years following his experience, similar encounters were reported across the United States. Researchers like Jerome Clark and John Keel documented numerous witnesses describing approaches by figures remarkably similar to Bender's visitors. These accounts raised profound questions about intimidation and secrecy surrounding UFO investigations. During the late 1950s and early 1960s, these mysterious encounters with men in black suits challenged conventional understanding. Witnesses from Virginia to Maine reported unsettling interactions characterized by mechanical speech and unnatural movements. For researchers like Clark, the underlying truth seemed clear. Wherever UFOs appeared, these enigmatic figures were never far behind. Their purpose appeared unambiguous: to maintain the mystery, to ensure that certain truths remained hidden. These encounters continued to challenge our understanding of the unknown, leaving investigators with more questions than answers. The Men in Black became a compelling part of UFO lore, representing an inexplicable force committed to preserving secrecy. Encounters with three mysterious men became a recurring theme in UFO research, challenging the boundaries of conventional understanding. Witnesses from diverse locations reported strikingly similar experiences, describing visitors who moved with unnatural precision and communicated with an otherworldly demeanor. In 1962, Albert Bender published a groundbreaking book, Flying Saucers and the Three Men, detailing his perspective on these enigmatic encounters. He suggested these entities originated from an underwater base with objectives focused on human observation and resource harvesting. While some researchers initially dismissed his account as far-fetched, the remarkable consistency across multiple testimonies began to lend credibility to his claims. The visitors were consistently described as deeply unsettling. Their movements appeared more like gliding than walking, and their faces remained expressionless. When entering a location, such as a home in California, where a woman and her children had witnessed a saucer-shaped craft, they would sit motionlessly. Their conversations avoided technical details about the craft, instead probing the emotional state and recent discussions of those they visited. Psychological manipulation seemed to be their primary tool. Witnesses reported feeling psychically drained after these encounters, with a strong, almost compulsive directive to remain silent about what they had seen. The core elements remained constant across different accounts: three men in dark suits, an oppressive psychological atmosphere, and a clear message of intimidation. Renowned researcher John Keel offered a radical interpretation, proposing that these figures might be ultraterrestrial beings from another layer of reality. Their purpose was not physical invasion, but a sophisticated manipulation of human perception. The aftermath of such encounters followed a predictable pattern, with witnesses experiencing an overwhelming urge to withdraw and remain silent. These accounts transformed UFO research, shifting mysterious figures from mere rumor to a central mythos. The Bender Three Men episode marked a pivotal moment, suggesting that extraordinary encounters might involve complex interactions beyond our current comprehension. Albert Bender's experience with the Men in Black epitomized a pattern of intimidation and suppression that would come to define UFO research. His silence wasn't a choice, but a burden, hinting at knowledge too dangerous to share. Researchers debated the nature of these encounters. Were they extraterrestrial beings, psychological projections, or a shadowy human intelligence operating in an alien manner? The International Flying Saucer Bureau, IFSB, was growing, with Bender's publication gaining momentum, before suddenly falling silent. His subsequent book read more like a coded confession than a clear account, raising suspicions even among skeptics. The Bendick case would become a cornerstone of Men in Black lore, illustrating their enduring influence on UFO investigation and setting a precedent for suppressing extraordinary experiences. Long before his presidency, Jimmy Carter had his own remarkable UFO encounter. In 1969, while running for governor of Georgia, Carter and about 10 others witnessed a strange phenomenon in the evening sky. He described a luminous orb that changed colors, hovering silently before moving away. Carter was certain it wasn't a conventional aircraft, weather balloon, or astronomical object. By 1973, Carter had become more open about his experience. He filed a formal report with the International UFO Bureau, documenting the sighting. When reporters asked about it, he was unusually frank. Carter admitted seeing something unidentified, but emphasized he didn't believe it was extraterrestrial. Instead, he suggested it might be an unknown natural phenomenon. His transparency was remarkable for a politician at the time, when UFO sightings were typically dismissed or ridiculed. Carter didn't shy away from discussing his experience. This openness, however, seemed to attract unusual attention. Several individuals close to Carter during his gubernatorial and early presidential campaigns reported strange encounters, adding another layer of mystery to his UFO story. Carter's UFO encounters followed a pattern that would unsettle most people. Mysterious figures in dark suits approached those connected to him, driving unmarked cars and speaking in unnatural tones. These men vaguely claimed to be federal agents, but never showed credentials. Their clear objective was to shut down any discussion of Carter's UFO sighting. During his 1976 presidential campaign, Carter made an audacious pledge about government UFO records. He promised full public disclosure, framing it as a citizen's right to know. But his enthusiasm vanished once he entered the White House. When journalists questioned his earlier commitment, Carter cited national security as a reason for secrecy, a dramatic shift from his previous openness. Strange encounters plagued Carter's campaign team. Volunteers reported unsettling incidents involving men in black suits. One volunteer described strangers appearing at his home, asking pointed questions and warning against discussing Carter's sightings. Another staffer recounted being followed by a dark sedan with tinted windows that mysteriously disappeared when he tried to confront it. Researchers claimed Carter himself received warnings. Supposedly, official-looking individuals cautioned him against exploring UFO topics during his presidency. While Carter never confirmed these encounters, they seemed to achieve their purpose. Some argue he simply became more cautious after understanding classified intelligence. Others see his sudden silence as evidence of more sinister pressures, whether through quiet threats, classified briefings, or visits from unusual officials. Carter's initial promise of transparency ultimately faded, leaving a trail of unanswered questions. His willingness to speak openly about UFOs stood in sharp contrast to typical political behavior. Few public figures dared to align themselves with such reports, making his initial honesty both unique and potentially provocative. Carter's silence around UFO encounters sparked widespread speculation about what truly transpired and why he dramatically altered his stance. The phenomenon extends far beyond rural landscapes, reaching into the highest corridors of governmental influence. His case stood out because it involved a future president who could potentially shift public understanding. Citizens had long reported mysterious encounters with strange visitors, particularly pale men in ill-fitting suits driving unmarked black vehicles. Researchers like Timothy Green Beckley and Jerome Clark documented these recurring patterns, noting mechanical voices delivering stark warnings. Though Carter never fully confirmed such encounters, the remarkable similarities suggested something significant was happening. Later in his political career, Carter maintained a carefully measured position. He acknowledged seeing something unidentified but stopped short of declaring it extraterrestrial. When questioned about why he didn't pursue UFO disclosure during his presidency, he referenced national security concerns and quickly changed the subject. For close observers, his silence seemed less like prudence and more like deliberate suppression. Military technologies, sensitive matters, and potential implications deeply entangled Carter's reticence. Some saw his silence as strategic political maneuvering, while others detected something more sinister. Carter had built a reputation on transparency, yet he fell silent after his mysterious interactions. Whether these figures represented intelligence operatives, psychological archetypes, or something entirely unknown, their effect remained unchanged, preventing a presidential commitment to UFO disclosure. For believers, Carter's story serves as compelling evidence of the Men in Black phenomenon's reach and impact. At the heart of this narrative sits Timothy Green Beckley, known as Mr. UFO of New York. He dedicated decades to documenting accounts that challenged believability, spanning everything from alien abductions to paranormal events. His work consistently highlighted the unsettling theme of mysterious, intimidating encounters that seemed designed to suppress information. Beckley's UFO research delved far deeper than second-hand accounts. His methods involved direct witness interviews, meticulously preserving testimonies others might have quickly dismissed. One New Jersey case from the early 1970s starkly illustrated the strange encounters he documented. A local family reported unusual nocturnal phenomena, small glowing orbs darting between trees and hovering near their roof. When they sought to share their experience with a local newspaper, the situation took an unexpected turn. Two men in dark suits arrived at their home, their approach aggressive and intimidating. Forcefully banging on the door, they demanded entry. Once inside, these self-proclaimed officials investigating aerial phenomena behaved far from professionally. They moved uninvited through the house, searching closets and cupboards with an intense, unsettling purpose. The confrontation reached a chilling moment when one man turned to the homeowner and delivered a stark warning. "You will forget what you saw. Do not speak of it again." The family was left deeply shaken by the encounter. Similar stories emerged from across the country. A New York City incident involving teenagers who spotted a disc-shaped craft over a vacant lot revealed a familiar pattern. When two men in black suits visited one boy's home, they claimed to be government agents, avoiding identification and warning the mother that her children must be mistaken. Their faces were unnaturally blank, their voices mechanical. Beckley's collected cases suggested more than isolated incidents. They pointed to a systematic campaign of intimidation and surveillance spanning rural farms and urban neighborhoods. For both skeptics and believers, these stories highlighted how secrecy and politics can intersect, revealing that even the most honest leaders have limits to what they can disclose. In the hushed world of UFO research, witnesses spoke only in whispers. They were haunted not by lights in the sky, but by the lingering memory of men whose presence felt deeply unnatural and invasive. The legacy of such encounters stands as a rare moment where the mystery of the skies brushed against the machinery of political power, leaving behind unanswered questions and a trail of silence. The incidents Beckley documented revealed a chilling pattern. Witnesses who spoke about their UFO encounters often found themselves confronting mysterious, intimidating forces. These experiences weren't about physical threats, but psychological manipulation. People reported overwhelming dread, energy depletion, and memory lapses that seemed to systematically erode their willingness to speak. A typical scenario unfolded with striking consistency. A witness would first encounter something unusual, then decide to discuss it. Shortly after, they would receive strange communications or unexpected visits. One particularly vivid example involved a late-night phone call with an unnervingly flat, metallic voice, warning the witness to stop discussing their sighting. Minutes later, a man in a dark suit matching the caller's description would appear at their door. Beckley recognized these weren't isolated incidents. Researchers like Bender and Hopkins had documented similar encounters. What made these experiences truly disturbing was their apparent goal of fundamentally altering witnesses' perception of reality. Individuals who had never met described remarkably similar interactions, suggesting a coordinated effort to suppress information. Throughout his career, Beckley himself seemed to attract unusual attention. He frequently shared stories of strange encounters, including a memorable night in the 1980s when a dark sedan without headlights waited outside his New York apartment. When he approached, the vehicle silently vanished. Critics argued that his willingness to publish these accounts undermined his credibility, yet even skeptics acknowledged the importance of his work. Without Beckley's documentation, many witness testimonies would have been lost, as frightened individuals were often too intimidated to share their experiences publicly. The boy who initially reported his encounter withdrew completely, never speaking of it again. The silence became a hallmark of the phenomenon Beckley spent his career investigating, a complex interplay of communication, authority, and human experience that challenged traditional understanding. Beckley's work became a pivotal collection exploring men in black encounters, revealing them as more than just mysterious visitors. Instead, he portrayed them as systematic enforcers of silence. His perspective remained nuanced and uncertain. He never claimed to fully understand these entities, wavering between theories of government operatives, extraterrestrial agents, or something entirely beyond comprehension. What struck Beckley most was their consistent presence wherever UFO stories threatened to emerge. In interviews, he often suggested these figures might be psychic projections rather than physical beings. Their behavior seemed performative, awkwardly mimicking human interactions. Outdated clothing, stilted speech, and surreal appearances led him to wonder if they were manifestations of an unknown intelligence designed specifically to instill fear. The profound psychological impact on witnesses was undeniable. Beckley repeatedly encountered individuals left deeply traumatized. Some abandoned their UFO research completely, while others avoided public spaces for months following encounters. By his death in 2021, he had assembled one of the most extensive personal archives of men in black reports. His legacy wasn't about proving definitive explanations, but about preserving testimonies that might otherwise vanish. Alba Rosales, a Cuban-born researcher who later moved to the United States, took a different approach in UFO studies. His obsessive dedication focused on cataloging humanoid encounters, while many researchers concentrated on saucers, skylights, or abduction cases. Rosales devoted himself to documenting testimonies of beings seen in fields, bedrooms, forests, and city streets. His compilations, spanning decades and thousands of cases, remain among the most comprehensive archives of humanoid encounters. A recurring pattern emerged within his vast catalog. Witnesses who encountered strange figures or unidentified craft frequently reported subsequent visits by men in dark suits, sometimes alone, sometimes in pairs, occasionally in groups of 3. Their purpose always remained consistent: to silence, to confuse. The story of the men in black weaves through countless UFO encounters, revealing a pattern that transcends cultural and geographical boundaries. Consider the mid-1960s case from Puerto Rico, where a woman reported seeing a disc-shaped craft with small figures nearby. After sharing her experience with her husband and a close friend, 2 men in dark suits arrived at her door. These government agents probed deeply into her encounter, asking pointed questions about her memory, whether she had discussed the sighting with others, and if she had documented her experience. Such encounters were not isolated incidents, but part of a broader phenomenon, meticulously documented by researchers like Rosales. For many UFO researchers, the men in black are far more than a curious side note. They represent an invisible force that keeps extraordinary experiences shrouded in mystery. As Beckley famously noted, their presence doesn't depend on belief. You don't have to believe in them for them to believe in you. Across different decades and continents, similar encounters emerged. In 1970s Texas, a truck driver witnessed a glowing oval craft hovering silently over a field. Days later, 2 unidentified men in black suits approached him at work, displaying an unsettling knowledge of his sighting, despite his never having reported it publicly. A comparable incident occurred in France in 1974, where a couple who had observed a hovering disc near their village was visited by 3 mysterious men in a black vehicle. These encounters shared remarkable similarities: unexpected visits, veiled threats, and an almost supernatural awareness of private experiences. The work of researchers like Rosales and Beckley was never about finding definitive proof. Instead, they provided a platform for ordinary people to share extraordinary experiences, ensuring that these stories remained part of the collective conversation. They preserved narratives that might otherwise have been dismissed or forgotten, giving voice to those who encountered the inexplicable. The men in black represent more than mere investigators. They are the keepers of silence, appearing whenever someone comes too close to understanding something beyond conventional explanation. Their presence suggests that some mysteries are meant to remain just that, mysterious. Mysterious encounters with unidentified craft and humanoid beings haunted witnesses across different countries and cultures. Rosales, a dedicated researcher, collected numerous accounts revealing a chilling pattern. Shortly after these sightings, 2 identically dressed men would arrive, asking probing questions about personal lives, work, income, and daily routines. In Argentina's late 1960s, a family near their farm reported a close encounter with the luminous craft and small humanoids. Soon after, 2 men in immaculately clean suits visited them. Similar stories emerged globally. Witnesses described not just strange lights, but actual beings, short figures with glowing eyes, humanoids in luminous suits, or creatures beyond description. The encounters followed an unsettling script. Men in dark suits would appear within days or weeks, as if triggered by an unknown containment protocol. One woman's experience was particularly haunting. After sketching a craft she had seen, men demanded her drawing and left abruptly. For years, she believed her phone was tapped, and she had been marked. These interactions were not confined to rural areas. London's urban landscape also hosted such bizarre encounters. In the 1980s, a young man who witnessed a glowing sphere hovering over houses was visited by 2 suited men, claiming to represent an unnamed institute. Their arrival was precise, their knowledge uncanny. Psychological manipulation seemed central to these interactions. Witnesses consistently reported feelings of dread and a sudden loss of interest in discussing their original experiences. Some were warned to remain silent under threat of great misfortune. Eager witnesses would become inexplicably subdued. Rosales emphasized the remarkable consistency across these accounts. Families and individuals from diverse backgrounds reported strikingly similar experiences. The men would arrive, ask specific questions, and leave witnesses feeling mysteriously drained. When challenged about their identity, they would vaguely state they represented authorities and depart quickly. The encounters suggested a systematic response to UFO sightings, carried out by agents whose origins remained unclear. Skeptics challenged Rosales' work, but the sheer volume and similarity of accounts demanded serious consideration. The Men in Black phenomenon has been a persistent mystery in UFO encounters worldwide for decades. Archivists, like Rosales, dedicated themselves to collecting and preserving these enigmatic stories, creating comprehensive resources for researchers seeking to understand this deep-rooted motif. Rosales' extensive files contained thousands of reports from diverse sources, many translated from foreign languages. While critics argued such broad data was prone to errors and exaggeration, Rosales maintained that the overall pattern remained undeniable despite potential individual case flaws. In his later writings, he explored multiple theories about these mysterious visitors. Were they secret intelligence agents, extraterrestrials in human disguise, or beings capable of traversing dimensional boundaries? What consistently struck him was their systematic approach to gathering and suppressing information about unexplained phenomena. These visitors seemed almost human, but not quite. Their stilted speech, awkward movements, and slightly off appearances suggested they were mimicking humanity without fully understanding it. Their interactions were deliberate, precise, and seemingly designed to discourage further investigation. One London resident's experience highlighted their unsettling nature. After an encounter, his notebooks containing sketches of a strange sphere vanished from his desk. When he grew uneasy and requested identification, the men simply smiled and suggested it was unnecessary. The Gulf Breeze, Florida case in the 1980s epitomized this phenomenon. A small coastal town suddenly found itself at the center of global attention when local contractor Ed Walters began circulating photographs of bright saucer-like craft hovering over suburban homes. In November 1987, Walters claimed his first UFO sighting near his house. The greatest mystery was not the UFOs themselves, but the silence that followed them. Witnesses consistently reported that the lights in the sky were less frightening than the knock at the door afterward. The craft inspired awe, but the men in black inspired fear. Dumpar sightings in Gulf Breeze rapidly captured researchers' attention due to their urban setting and multiple witnesses. Unlike isolated rural encounters, these incidents unfolded in a populated coastal town under intense public scrutiny. Witnesses consistently reported strange lights, structured craft, and unsettling follow-up encounters. One chilling example involved a young couple who photographed unusual aerial phenomena near Shoreline Park. Two pale-skinned men in dark suits confronted them, coldly declaring, "You will not need them. They are not yours to keep." The photographs vanished without explanation. Another resident who observed a bright disk over Pensacola Bay received an emotionless warning phone call against media communication. A dark sedan began repeatedly parking across the street at strange hours, creating an atmosphere of deep unease. In a similar incident, a witness was visited by two men presenting themselves as federal agents after reporting a silent triangular craft. Their questions focused not on the craft's details, but on the investigators he had spoken with and potential photographic evidence. The interaction felt more like an intimidation tactic than a legitimate inquiry. These accounts, meticulously collected by researchers like Muon, mirrored classic Men in Black encounters. A pattern emerged. Witnesses would experience something extraordinary, share their observations, and subsequently be contacted by mysterious figures demanding silence. With a Polaroid camera capturing clear images that quickly gained national attention, other residents began reporting strange lights, glowing objects over water, and close encounters with structured craft. Rosales noted this long-standing pattern of revelation and suppression that has haunted UFO history for over half a century. As he once remarked, "The lights may come and go, but the silence they leave behind is permanent, and the silence is enforced." While skeptics dismissed some photographic evidence as hoaxes, the remarkable consistency of these encounters continued to challenge our understanding of the unknown. The Men in Black were not mere observers, but active participants in a story that remained frustratingly incomplete. The UFO phenomenon in Gulf Breeze painted a complex picture of unexplained aerial encounters that shook the community's sense of normalcy. Residents found themselves sharply divided, with some fully believing in the sightings while others dismissed them as elaborate hoaxes. For those who experienced direct encounters, the issue transcended mere belief. It was about raw fear and the constant feeling of being watched. Ed Walters' personal experiences embodied this unsettling atmosphere. Strange phone calls, suspicious vehicles lurking near his home, and unknown men tracking his movements became his daily reality. These incidents raised questions about whether they were connected to the mysterious Men in Black phenomenon, or simply a result of intense media scrutiny. One particularly disturbing account involved a Pensacola Naval Air Station employee. After he and his colleagues reported unusual lights over the Gulf, he was summoned to a private meeting. Two unidentified men in black suits confronted him, not his military superiors. Their questioning was precise and unnerving, focusing intently on what he had witnessed and whether he intended to file an official report. When he requested identification, their behavior became evasive, subtly suggesting it would be in his best interest to forget what he had seen. He ultimately concluded these were not genuine Navy personnel. Researchers investigating the Gulf Breeze incidents held widely varying perspectives. While they might disagree about the UFO photographs, many found the Men in Black accounts remarkably compelling. Some theorized that intelligence agencies were systematically monitoring witnesses to control information. Others pointed to classic Men in Black characteristics: pale skin, mechanical speech, outdated clothing, and vehicles that seemed to materialize and vanish mysteriously. Skeptics argued these stories were merely products of media-driven hysteria, yet the reports from unrelated individuals were striking. Witnesses across the region, with no direct connection to Ed Walters, had simply been unfortunate enough to observe unusual aerial activity. The Gulf Breeze encounters amplified an existing sense of paranoia, transforming a peaceful community into a landscape of uncertainty and unresolved questions. For years, the sky over the northeastern United States and Canada held a mystery that would captivate thousands of witnesses. On December 9, 1965, a fiery object streaked across the heavens near Kecksburg, Pennsylvania, marking what would later be called the Roswell of the East. Initial reports from 6 states around 4:45 p.m. described a brilliant fireball traveling southwest, sparking intense curiosity and speculation. Newspapers in Detroit, Windsor, and Pittsburgh were inundated with calls from excited eyewitnesses. People described a flaming mass trailing sparks, moving with an unnatural precision that defied typical meteor behavior. While NASA claimed it was a standard meteor, many witnesses argued the flight path seemed too controlled to be a random celestial event. The incident took an even stranger turn when military forces and shadowy officials descended upon the quiet farming community. Men matching the description of the infamous Men in Black suddenly appeared, adding layers of intrigue to an already extraordinary event. Their presence suggested something more complex was happening beyond a simple astronomical occurrence. This event became a pivotal moment in UFO folklore, exemplifying a pattern of unexplained aerial phenomena. In the decades that followed, similar encounters would emerge, such as the Del Breeze incidents of the 1980s. Each shared a common thread: mysterious lights, followed by equally mysterious visitors intent on maintaining silence. Years later, researchers and journalists would analyze the Kecksburg event, proposing various theories. Some suggested the encounters might involve ordinary government investigators or local pranksters. The stories became an integral part of Gulf Breeze's complex UFO narrative, blending documented accounts with speculation and mystery. One Gulf Breeze witness years later captured the essence of these encounters perfectly. "The lights in the sky didn't scare me. What scared me was the knock at the door afterward. They knew things they shouldn't have. And once they came, the small town of Kecksburg, southeast of Pittsburgh, became the epicenter of an extraordinary event. A large acorn-shaped object had descended into a wooded ravine, witnessed by several residents. A young boy playing outside saw it streak across the sky, vanishing behind the trees. Adults heard a distinct thud, as if something had struck the ground, yet no explosion followed. As townspeople ventured into the woods to investigate, they discovered something remarkable. The object, roughly the size of a small car, was partially embedded in the earth. Its bronze-colored surface bore strange markings along the base, which is some compared to hieroglyphs. Witnesses who approached claimed to sense a faint humming or vibration. Within hours, the scene transformed dramatically. Military trucks rolled in, blocking roads and sealing off the woods. Armed personnel swarmed the area with remarkable speed, positioning themselves along dirt lanes and preventing anyone from getting close. The response seemed too swift for a simple meteor strike. Alongside uniformed soldiers, unidentified men in plain suits appeared to direct the operation with stern authority. They did not introduce themselves or show identification. Instead, they methodically questioned locals who had seen the object, pressing for precise details. The encounters were intimidating, with several witnesses recalling being explicitly told to remain silent. Years later, one farmer who had seen the object up close shared his experience with a reporter. 2 men in dark suits approached him near the cordoned area. When he described the acorn-shaped craft, they exchanged a meaningful look and delivered a chilling warning. "You did not see that. You will not speak of it again." These encounters revealed something deeper, a presence that existed long before specific incidents, and would continue long after the shadowy figures disappeared. The men in black seemed less interested in the UFOs themselves and more concerned with those who witnessed them, always working to suppress information and maintain an air of mystery. The night the mysterious object fell in Kecksburg set in motion a series of events that would silence the community for decades. Military trucks rolled in under cover of darkness, their cargo shrouded in tarps. A local woman reported being forcefully turned away from the area, followed by a visit from two suited men who insisted she must have misunderstood what she saw. The response was clinical and calculated. Military personnel worked alongside strange, pale figures who seemed more intent on giving orders than following them. Local radio reporter John Murphy collected witness interviews, only to have his materials mysteriously confiscated. His subsequent reporting became subdued, and he later died in an unexplained car accident. By morning, the woods were empty. Official statements dismissed the incident as a meteor burning up in the atmosphere, but the town knew differently. Residents had seen too much. The object in the woods, the military presence, the strange men enforcing absolute silence. For years, Kecksburg kept its secrets. Witnesses remained silent, afraid of ridicule or potential consequences. Only in the 90s did some begin to speak, describing the men in black as expressionless and commanding. The true nature of the incident remains unresolved. Some researchers suggest it was a Soviet satellite from the Cosmos series, quietly recovered by U.S. military personnel. Others point to the object's unique acorn shape and mysterious markings as evidence of something more extraordinary. The farmer who first witnessed the event carried this weight of silence for decades, too unnerved to speak about what he had seen. Military vehicles suddenly invaded a small Pennsylvania town, bringing an unsettling silence after an extraordinary event. Children who witnessed the incident years ago still remember the moment vividly. A mysterious object with strange symbols had briefly rested in the woods, sparking whispers that would endure for decades. The Kecksburg incident became more than just a sighting of an unusual craft. Dark-suited men arrived, systematically controlling the narrative and suppressing any detailed accounts. Their presence followed a pattern seen in numerous UFO encounters, swiftly shutting down potential revelations about something extraordinary. Similar dynamics emerged in the Flatwoods Monster case, another compelling narrative of unexplained phenomena. On September 12, 1952, in West Virginia, brothers Edward and Fred May, along with their friend Tommy Heyer, witnessed a glowing object descending into a farmer's field. Children and adults reported encountering a bizarre entity after a fiery object streaked across a hillside, capturing nationwide newspaper attention. What followed mirrored the Kecksburg experience. Weeks after the sighting, locals experienced visits from strange men in dark suits, embodying an emerging phenomenon of intervention and suppression. Newspapers had initially treated the green monster as a thrilling curiosity, but for those present, the aftermath felt deeply unsettling. While NASA maintained no object was recovered in Kecksburg, they curiously admitted in 2003 that documentation of the incident had gone missing, a statement that only deepened existing suspicions. For many researchers, these incidents represented more than isolated events. They were coordinated operations, blending soldiers and suited figures, effectively silencing communities that had glimpsed something never meant to be seen. The men who followed these sightings were as significant as the objects themselves. Whether government, operatives, intelligence agents, or something more enigmatic, their consistent effect was erasing truth and enforcing silence, much like in similar incidents involving Bender and Hopkins. The woods held a secret that would soon captivate the nation. A group ventured into the forest and emerged with a chilling account that would haunt Flatwoods for generations. At the tree line, they confronted a monstrous figure, nearly 10 feet tall, with a spade-shaped head, glowing eyes, and mechanical-looking arms. The encounter was punctuated by a blood-curdling hiss, and a stomach-turning sulfur stench. Overcome with fear, the witnesses fled, convinced they had seen something beyond earthly comprehension. News spread rapidly, drawing reporters and investigators who debated the sighting's origin. Was it a misidentified owl, a meteor, or something far more enigmatic? The aftermath proved equally disturbing. Witnesses began suffering unexplained health issues. Throat irritation, nausea, and persistent headaches plagued them. Local doctors were baffled, unable to provide any rational explanation. This medical mystery only fueled speculation about the extraordinary event. Then came the mysterious visitors. Dark-suited men arrived, identifying themselves as investigators. Their approach was calculated and intimidating. They didn't just ask about what was seen, but carefully monitored how much information had been shared. One witness described men in a black, unlicensed sedan, who were polite yet menacing, pressing for detailed accounts while subtly threatening silence. Another family reported similar encounters. Government agents questioned the children who were present during the original sighting. When the children described the creature's glowing eyes and mechanical movements, the men exchanged knowing glances and abruptly terminated the interview. They instructed parents to silence their children, claiming it was for their protection. The Flatwoods incident quickly became a media sensation. Local Sheriff Robar acknowledged the town was overwhelmed, not just by reporters, but by mysterious officials whose true intentions remained unclear. What began as an evening walk had transformed into a mysterious encounter that would be discussed and debated for years to come, leaving the community with more questions than answers. The Flatwoods Monster incident quickly became more than a local tale, transforming into a complex narrative about suppression and mystery. Town residents recalled outsiders as intimidating figures who showed little respect for the community, with dark clothing, unmarked vehicles, and chilling warnings as their hallmarks. Researchers have drawn intriguing parallels between these encounters and later Men in Black incidents. The aftermath was a tangled mix of spectacle and suppression, where media headlines turned the event into a sensationalized monster story while witnesses experienced clear pressure to minimize their testimony. Years later, a particularly unsettling account surfaced. A man who had been a child during the incident shared how his father, initially vocal about the sighting, was visited by two suited men at his workplace. They bluntly warned that discussing the event could have serious consequences for his family. The father returned home visibly shaken and never spoke of the sighting again. The truth became quickly obscured between mocking press coverage and intimidating visits. Researchers find the Men in Black element especially puzzling. If the incident was simply a misidentified owl or meteor, why would mysterious officials go to such lengths to silence witnesses? The unmarked cars, veiled threats, and warnings to children suggest someone, whether government operatives or something more enigmatic, was deeply invested in preventing the story from gaining credibility. Some skeptics argue these visitors might have been Air Force investigators from Project Blue Book, active at the time. However, this explanation falls short, as official Blue Book records contain no documentation of such interventions. Witnesses described these men as cold, secretive, and seemingly unnatural. They moved with a purpose that went beyond simple fact-finding. Their goal was clear: silence those who had seen too much. Over decades, the town adapted to its newfound fame, even erecting statues to commemorate the mysterious event. Festivals may celebrate the legend now, but a darker undercurrent runs beneath the surface. Men in suits once descended to erase uncomfortable truths, leaving witnesses trapped in a web of silence. Most kept their experiences locked away, sharing details only with close family or trusted researchers like John Keel and Gray Barker, who believed the Men in Black were real. Their reluctance revealed the deep intimidation they had endured. This wasn't just about UFO enthusiasts. These mysterious visitors targeted entire rural West Virginia communities. approaching ordinary families and even children whose only transgression was witnessing something extraordinary. Their method was systematic: shape public perception, ensure sensational headlines and dismissive explanations would overshadow actual testimonies. The Flatwoods' legacy is deeply nuanced. One side presents an enduring monster legend with vivid, eerie descriptions. The other exposes a stark early example of deliberate narrative manipulation. These figures arrived not to investigate, but to bury the truth completely. An elderly witness captured this sentiment perfectly. But the real terror wasn't what appeared on the hill that night. It was who came afterward, demanding silence and erasure. The story of Flatwoods remains a haunting reminder of how quickly truth can be suppressed. Daily content keeps people informed, while powerful social and media influences continually reshape how groups remember and understand events. Staying current means navigating complex narratives that evolve rapidly, with information streams constantly transforming our shared understanding of the world around us. Memory isn't just personal, it's a collective experience influenced by what we see, read, and hear every day. The way information spreads and gets interpreted can fundamentally alter how entire communities perceive historical and current events, making our collective memory a dynamic and fluid concept.